Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku had Byakugan and Sharingan and fell for Itsuka? Part 1. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is with Eyes to See by Targetedandfiring. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. It all began with a glowing child. The birth of that child was the start of a new era in human evolution, the era of quirks. After this birth, people around the globe began to develop superpowers. No one knew exactly what was causing these quirks to manifest, but before long what was once thought supernatural became the new normal. The world became a superhuman society, with about 80% of the population possessing some uncanny ability. Things weren't all great initially. The streets filled with chaos and confusion, and soon a dominant profession emerged. It was the age of heroes. With the rise of superpowers came an enormous increase in criminal activity. While governments were stuck trying to figure out how to reform laws with quirks in mind, courageous people started committing heroic acts to keep their cities safe, protecting innocents from villains who used their powers for evil. With overwhelming public support, heroes found an official place as peacekeepers overseen by the government. Those who performed the best were paid the most and received all the fame and glory. Their careers depended on their ability to stay in the spotlight. That was why, for a young Izuku Midoriya, it was obvious what his dreams and aspirations were. He wanted to be a hero, one who could save people and stop villains with a big smile, just like his favorite hero All Might. There was just one slight problem: his quirk hadn't developed just yet. Izuku and his mother had been worried when he hadn't developed his quirk along with the other children in kindergarten. He had initially been worried, but a trip to the doctors had confirmed that Izuku wasn't quirkless but just a late bloomer. Granted, that didn't inspire much hope in Izuku. Late bloomers often develop very weak quirks, and some quirks could stay dormant deep into a person's 20s or even in some rare cases, 30s. Unlike other young children his age, young Izuku was relatively more mature. His father's unfortunate death while working overseas changed Izuku's perspective early on in life. He was more silent and cynical, and had begun to pick up on things that no kindergartner had thought about, like how his mother bit her lip and stared at her purse, before putting things back on the shelves at the grocery store. The bags that were under her eyes when she woke up in the morning were telling her that she had been crying herself to sleep. Izuku couldn't blame her. He also seemed to fall into tears on some nights since the passing of Hisashi Midoriya. It had led Izuku to some startling conclusions about his home life since his father's passing. With Hisashi gone, there was no longer a stable income being provided to the Midoriya home. A man from the life insurance company had come by recently to speak with Izuku's mother, and they had received a sizable fund, but Izuku was under no pretenses that those funds would last forever. Based on how much his mother had been worrying about funds, Inko Midoriya had likely only kept what was necessary and put the rest into a savings account for either Izuku's schooling or her retirement. They wouldn't be able to continue living with their previous spending levels. His mother would likely get a job, but she wasn't as well educated as Hisashi. Therefore it was likely her job wouldn't pay nearly as much. His mother would be busy and wouldn't be able to spend nearly as much time at home. Izuku was the man of the house now and needed to pick up skills to maintain the home while his mother was at work. Finally, there was the biggest issue. Katsuki Bakugo, a young boy Izuku's age, had developed a strong explosion quirk. He looked down on anyone he perceived as weaker than him, especially those who didn't have quirks yet like Izuku. Izuku had kept close to him because they had been good friends growing up, a friendship encouraged by their mothers, who had grown up together as well. However, lately, Katsuki had begun to use his quirk on those he deemed worthless, nothing, or more precisely in Izuku Midoriya's case, Deku's. It had already resulted in several burns, and if things continued, Izuku wasn't sure they'd be able to pay for the constant need for first aid supplies and doctor visits. These thoughts occupied a 6-year-old Izuku Midoriya as he sat on a playground swing. At 6 years old and without a quirk, Izuku couldn't help but bite his lip at the thought of not being able to follow his dreams or what those struggles might mean for the future of his now smaller family. Mom has been looking for work, and my quirk still hasn't come in. What's going to happen to us? Izuku thought to himself. It was fair to say that the young child was dealing with a tumult of emotions. It was this distracted state that led Izuku to not realize that someone was approaching him. It was only when he felt the explosive shove from behind that he realized he should have been paying better attention to his surroundings. Hey, stupid Deku. What did I say last time about playing on this playground? Came an abrasive taunt from a familiar voice, a smirking Katsuki Bakugo. Kei Kachin, IJ just, Izuku called out, teary-eyed from the burns on his back. He struggled to stand back up, but Bakugo just walked over and delivered an effortless punch to Izuku's face, knocking him back down to the ground. Shut up, you quirkless loser. This playground is mine. Just cause your daddy died doesn't mean you can come and play on it, Bakugo said as he gave Izuku a hard kick. His eyes were filled with anger. How dare this worthless Deku come play on my playground? I'm gonna destroy him, Bakugo thought as he went to deliver another kick. Izuku flinched as he was kicked hard in the stomach, tears continuing to flow down his face. Why am I so weak? I wish I had my... Izuku's thoughts were cut off as the world suddenly got very big. Or rather, he felt a rush to his head, and the veins around his right eye suddenly expanded. At that moment, he just saw everything. He could see all around him, up to the borders of the park. When he meant everything, he meant everything. Bakugo was entirely flesh and bones, and he could even see the organs pumping on his inside, even his nerves were easily visible. His vision had gone from being only front-facing to being in a full 360-degree radius and stretching for vast distances. It was rather dizzying, but could this be his quirk? No, it wasn't just the 360-degree vision. His left eye didn't have that same ability. While Izuku had felt the veins on his right eye bulge as they seemed to carry more blood to the eye. Maybe I need to drink a lot more water to increase its effectiveness. The nerve endings on his left eye were flaring, and threatening to give Izuku a headache. Everything Izuku saw with his left eye was slowed down was the best estimation Izuku could give. No, it was more. As he stared at Bakugo, who looked like he was moving in slow motion, his leg coming closer and closer, somehow Izuku just knew that he could copy that exact motion and stance should he attempt it. As he stared at Bakugo, Izuku could even predict the angle of the kick based on how his leg muscles were flexing. Where did that knowledge come from? So the right eye lets me see everything in about a 60-meter radius, and my left eye gives me hypervisual awareness while letting me copy. Yes, copy or pick up the information I've looked at with that eye, Izuku thought. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like the eyes worked together. He couldn't combine the left eye's hypervisual awareness with the right eye's all-seeing prowess, a drawback, but that was fine. Time to show Bakugo I'm not as weak as he thinks, Izuku thought as he grinned, before immediately discovering another drawback to his new quirk. While his eye could see what was going on, it didn't matter when his body wasn't quick enough to react. Yes, everything was slowed down to a fraction of a second. Yes, he could tell that Bakugo was aiming a strong kick towards his gut. However, Izuku was, at his core, a 6-year-old who had never done anything to increase his body's reaction speed. To sum it up, his body was untrained and just couldn't keep up with the information flow of his eyes. It was therefore no surprise when Izuku arrived home, bruised and bloody but with a big grin on his face. He had a quirk, of course. He could handle a beating from Bakugo if it meant he would finally develop his quirk. Inko Midoriya, upon seeing the disheveled state of her son, rushed over to him quickly, looking him over with a worried look on her face. Oh, Izuku, what happened? Did Katsuki do this again? Inko asked, fetching some ointment to put over her son's burns and bruises. She was stunned upon seeing the red burns on her son's back, and the bloody lip from what seemed to be a blow to the face. Even his stomach was sporting some large black bruises. She couldn't believe just how much Bakugo had changed since developing his quirk. While his mother, Mitsuki Bakugo, could be quite abrasive and explosive, she had never been violent toward any of her friends. And wait. What was wrong with Izuku's eye? As a matter of fact, why wasn't he in tears? Izuku looked happy. Oh, Izuku, your right eye, did you injure it? She asked, surprised by the milky color of the eye. She wiped the hair from the right side of Izuku's eye to get a better look at it. The eye lacked any semblance of a pupil, or maybe the pupil had changed color and now had taken up a larger portion. On closer inspection, the pupil was a very light, almost white, lavender. Huh, what do you mean, Mom? Izuku asked, confused. Since awakening his quirk, Izuku hadn't had the chance to look in the mirror, so while he knew his quirk was ocular based on the strain of his eyes, he hadn't realized that one of his eyes had changed colors. All Izuku had felt was the strain in his left eye and the bulging veins of his right eye. Izuku, your right eye, it's all pale and white, Inko managed to force out, still surprised by the shocking condition of her son. Oh, maybe it's a part of my quirk. Izuku wondered to himself. A pale right eye. His mom was very specific about it being only his right eye. Why had his left eye also not changed with his quirk awakening? Perhaps it was because they both did two different things. While his right eye supplied the 360-degree vision, his left eye seemed to allow Izuku to perceive things more slowly and even, predict what was going to happen based on what he'd noticed from how he'd been able to easily guess the trajectory and action Kacchan was going to pull off. That was very strange for Izuku. Ocular quirks were very rare, and the only hero who jumped to the top of his mind that was big nowadays with an ocular quirk was Sir Night-Eye. Not to mention that it was rather strange that his mother and father didn't have ocular quirks that even slightly would have suggested the development of an ocular quirk for Izuku. Then again, there were plenty of documented examples of late bloomers like Izuku who had developed new or radically different quirks based on the quirks of their parents. Izuku might have been one such. "Honey, you are mumbling again," Inko said softly, her torrent of tears and worry having dispersed to be replaced with a swell of happiness. Izuku was glowing in a way he hadn't before. Where once her boy had arrived home despondent and depressed, more often since the passing of his father, Izuku looked so happy again. Inko was reminded of when they had first received the diagnosis that her son had been a late bloomer. It may as well have a confirmation to the rest of the kids his age and even to Inko, that he was basically quirkless. Especially when his 5th birthday passed. Izuku had been inconsolable after being called quirkless by his classmates, and when he'd asked her for reassurance about whether he could still be a hero without a quirk, Inko hadn't been able to give her son those assurances. It was a shame she'd had to live with. Of course, a part of her understood how foolhardy it was to be a hero without a quirk. There hadn't been any quirkless hero in almost 30 years now. Most hero schools didn't accept the quirkless, so many who wanted to stop crime and be heroes took up self-destructive lifestyles as vigilantes, eventually leading to their deaths. Inko should know, she'd done the research after discovering that Izuku was quirkless. Sure, there were plenty of heroes with quirks that weren't ideal for catching villains or saving people. A new mountain rescue hero group had taken to the scene. The Wild Pussycats, and 2 of their members often fought villains and rescued those in danger with just their pure fighting skill. Their quirks weren't very flashy at all. Even heroes with erasure-type quirks were often only evening out the playing field to a fight with no quirk involvement. Pro hero Silent Touch in Korea was well known for his touch-based erasure quirk, which only had practical uses in calming down civilians who were inexperienced with using their quirks or fighting villains. Despite the handicap, he still managed to. "Mom, you're mumbling," Izuku said with a smile on his face, watching as his mother blushed bright red at her son's comment. Well, he had to get that nervous and analytical mind from somewhere. After getting over her embarrassment, Inko Midoriya began to tear up again. This time the fountain of tears came not from the fact her son was injured, but because of her own shame. She immediately took her son into a hug, the tears cascading down even harder. "Oh, Izuku, my baby, I'm sorry. When you wanted to be a hero even without a quirk, I should have supported you. I know that there are heroes out there who get by on martial arts and skill more than their quirks, but a part of me was scared. It was going to be a hard road. People would discriminate against you for your status of being quirkless. Without a quirk, the odds of you getting hurt were going to be even worse." Inko snuffled out through sobs, "But even with a quirk, people are hurting you. I've seen the burns. This is Katsuki's doing, isn't it? He's hurting you, and even now that you have a quirk, you're still hurt. I know things are tough right now, Izuku, but I promise with all my heart that I will support you in every endeavor you ask, like I should have from the start. Honey, I believe you can be an amazing hero." Izuku stood stunned in his mother's grip. Tears flowed freely from his face as he hugged his mother back. The words he'd waited for all his life to hear. Someone believed that they could be a hero. His mom thought that he could be a hero. It had been a long day for Izuku. His arms and gut were bruised and burnt. His clothes were ruined. He had a black eye. Izuku Midoriya was not doing so well physically, but damn it, he had a quirk. A cool quirk that had to do with his eyes. Someone believed that Izuku could be a great hero. That someone was his mom, the same one that had crushed his dreams only 2 years prior. Shakily, his hands curled around his mother as Izuku hugged her back. The torrent of tears the two expelled cascaded onto the carpet of the Midoriya household. Only this time, for the first time in weeks, those tears were born of joy and happiness and held a powerful promise within them. Izuku Midoriya was going to be a hero. The following weeks had afforded Izuku very little time to explore the possibilities of his quirk besides playing around with the activation conditions. Inko had been serious about providing as much support as possible for her son and had quickly pulled him from school after Katsuki's latest attack on Izuku. She'd filed an incident report with the police since she had to take Izuku to the doctor to get some of his burns treated as well. However, it was put only as a minor infraction on Bakugo's file with the excuse that it was all just a little bit of roughhousing between boys that went a little too hard. This had further put a strain on Inko's relationship with her now former friend Mitsuki, who, while sympathetic with Inko's cause, wished she'd been made aware of Katsuki's attack on Izuku before having to get the police involved. For some reason, Mitsuki Bakugo was confident she could have straightened her boy out herself instead of needing things to get so official. Inko hoped that by involving the police, Katsuki would realize just how seriously he had hurt her son as well as cut down the arrogance he was starting to develop at school, where his teachers seemingly had suspiciously not kept track of Katsuki Bakugo's use of a quirk on students or his violent temperament. Regardless of the whole situation, Inko had decided that there was obvious favoritism going on in the surrounding community towards Katsuki Bakugo and her son would suffer for it if he remained in school. Thankfully, she had already been in the process of moving. Their apartment in busy Mustafu was way out of her price, while it would be easy to maintain on the funds from her husband's life insurance for a year or two, it would soon be too expensive to maintain the upkeep. Instead, she immediately began to look for a new home in a cheaper area to live in had been fortunate to find a nice little home in Chiba Prefecture, in the small fishing town of Ichinomiya, which had access to a commuter line to a few nearby resorts, where she hoped she'd be able to get a job to help maintain them instead of rushing through their savings needlessly. She'd given a public school a call that she and her son were still finalizing the moving process, but that she wanted to enroll her son for the new semester. Until then, Izuku would finish his studies at home. Thankfully, Izuku had a brilliant mind, and his good grades and clean record meant that the transition would be easy once the new school year started. She'd even found that there were a few dojos in the small town that, if she was tracking expenses correctly, she'd be able to afford for Izuku to attend. She'd given him the choice of his pick of dojos and had been quite surprised by some of his selections. He'd insisted on a very traditional ninjutsu dojo. "Mom, my quirk, so far as I can tell so far, it isn't very flashy. I need to pick a style that complements it. With my white eye, I can see everything so I have a better advantage in a fight with limited visibility. Being sneaky will help with limiting my visibility and learning to use weapons will be super helpful as well. It's better to keep villains at a distance, and it'll mean less of a chance of villains seeing how my quirk operates and blinding me with sand or attacking my eyes." With that statement, Inko had been convinced by Izuku's first choice. The second choice that Izuku made was just as surprising for her. "This dojo is in Chiba City. I'll have to take the train line to get there, but I've read a few articles about them online. They train their students in karate, but as if they were in actual fights instead of using traditional point-scoring techniques. I've seen some videos, and it's not dissimilar to some Muay Thai or mixed martial arts fights I've seen online. I know All Might is an awesome hero, but his fighting style in particular just wouldn't work for me. He has the strength and durability to go for the full frontal boxing assault he likes to use. I don't have a strength-enhancing quirk like he does, so my fighting style needs to be more adaptable. This karate dojo has got to be the one." With Izuku's choice solidified, they spent the next weeks finishing Izuku's schoolwork and packing up their apartment. Their new home in Ichinomiya was small and quaint. The weather in the small town was very nice. It was situated on the sea, and while the summers felt like it could be very humid, the town had resisted the industrialization of some of the larger cities. It was quaint, homely, and surprisingly rustic. Melon farms were the big agricultural export, so there was always a sweet fragrance in the air. Local fishermen cast off from the docks by the bay, heading out to the ocean for their daily fishing. Their new home was on the small side, and quite traditional. Their little minka was situated within a small grove of trees situated on a hill just outside of town. It was a private abode, closer to the melon farms than the conveniences of town. A small wooden veranda stretched the perimeter of the home, and the scent of clean air from the tatami mats cemented the traditional atmosphere. Unlike the steel and concrete of Mustafu, their driveway was fine gravel, and a natural overhand of trees acted as the closest estimation for a parking garage. Where Mustafu was stifling and busy, their new abode was peaceful and quiet, with the only unusual sounds to grace them in the evenings being the hum of cicadas and the chirping of the occasional tree frog. Izuku's room was a little smaller than the one that he'd had at their old apartment, but it had the necessities. A small desk so he could do his homework, a futon was rolled up in the closet, and a cabinet for his books and All Might collection. It was perhaps the biggest change since they'd had to sell Izuku's old bed anyway. He was a growing boy after all, and it gave them more space for some of the All Might figurines he wanted to keep. After some discussion, he'd concluded that some of the All Might memorabilia he likely didn't need anymore, although his mother had kept some for herself, like Izuku's favorite shirt that he had thrown up over when he was 2. They'd tried to get rid of the stain but in the process had turned it pink. While it had been a frustrating experience for Inko, Izuku had been inconsolable about it following the incident. She couldn't help but smile when she thought of the memory. Finally, after all the moving in, Izuku could start properly experimenting with his quirk. The first thing he did was stand in front of a mirror and take a look at his eyes. Without his quirk activated, his left eye was the usual green. Of note, the pupil and iris of his eye took up a slightly larger portion of the sclera, although it wasn't a very obvious change. The right eye, however, had gone through a much more drastic change. While his left eye at least maintained its green coloration, his right eye at first glance looked like it had gone blind. The pupil and iris had expanded to take up a larger portion of the sclera, with the iris having a thin black border that was hard to make out. The differences between the iris and the pupil were even harder to spot. Both were in shades of a light lavender that was just barely distinguishable from the white sclera, with the pupil being only slightly darker than the iris. When he activated his quirk, things got a bit more interesting. With his left eye, the activation was rather unsettling. All in the iris, except the black edge between the sclera, seemed to almost swirl was the best descriptor that Izuku could come up with, into the pupil, and a deep red color would come swirling out of the pupil to replace the green, with a single black tomo seemingly hovering just below the pupil. When his left eye was activated, Izuku's perception of the world seemed to slow down or maybe heighten. Things were seen in exceptional clarity and ingrained definition, and when he strained to perceive, he could even enhance the clarity. Izuku was surprised by how easily he could make out the hair follicles on his skin. By observing a fly on the windowsill, Izuku knew the moment before it lifted off to fly, seeing the spring of tension in its limbs the microsecond before it flew into the air. When Izuku looked at himself, he could just faintly make out blue lines of energy running beneath the surface of his skin. Perhaps, it lets me see the electrical signals running through a human body. Easy way to test that would be, Izuku looked up at the bathroom light, disheartened when it looked like a typical light, without the blue glow present within his body. So, if it's not the electrical pathways from the nervous system, what is it? Gonna need to do some research to figure that out. Despite how interesting his left eye was, there seemed to be one major downside for now. It seemed he couldn't combine its benefits with the ones his right eye provided. Perhaps after he trained his quirk some more, he'd be able to. On activation of Izuku's quirk, his right eye hadn't had much of a dramatic change. However, the veins along the right side of his face leading up to his eye had suddenly swollen large to the extent they protruded from the skin slightly. So larger veins likely mean increased blood flow and more nutrients to that area of the body. Even standing here, it kind of feels a little bit as if I'd just had my head upside down. There's a lot of blood rushing to my head now, but the perks are amazing. Izuku's field of vision with his right eye had expanded tremendously. It expanded through the walls, into people, out into the forest surrounding their home. Everything had a black and white coloration to it, but he could see all around himself. My range seems to have increased by a little bit, maybe more use will help train it. His thoughts were cut off as he noticed that his right eye had caught a glimpse of his mom in the kitchen. It was a strange experience. When he had mentally processed that he was staring at his mom, the eye almost pulsed a bit, and enhanced it on her more. For a split second, Izuku got a glimpse of what his mother looked like naked, which made the young boy blush in embarrassment before the view enhanced again and he was staring at muscles and bones. It was rather strange. It was like he could change the focus on how well he could see through something. Another thing to note was that he could see the blue lines that he'd spotted earlier within himself. It was like a network of energy that flowed through the body, and while at some points it matched up with the nervous system, it seemed to flow differently to the nervous system. The blue lines wound around important organs and through muscles. As Izuku was observing, he watched the entire pathway along his mother's right arm flare out a bit as she floated a few plates over for the dinner she was making. So, these pathways are a representation of quirks inside the body. If they glow brighter when a quirk is used, well, quirks are just muscles we have to train to develop even further. Mom isn't a hero, but her quirk pathway system is much more defined in comparison to mine. Heroes must have large quirk pathway systems from using and training their quirk in comparison to children just developing a quirk or even the quirkless. Do quirkless people even have quirk pathway systems? This is all under the assumption that what I'm seeing is the representation of how a quirk expresses itself within the body. Maybe there's more information about this online. As Izuku turned off the quirk, he yelled out through the house so his mom would know that he was getting on the computer before he hopped on and started trying to find what he'd seen. Quirk pathways, Izuku said aloud as he typed, pressing one key at a time. It was slow work, but as he hit enter, the articles that came up were rather disappointing in scope. Pathway to heroism, your quirk, finding the right path for your special ability, and scandal between Italy's pathway hero and France's painting hero lead to 3 arrests by GHC, suspected quirk trafficking, were only some of the articles that came up. Let's try. Quirk nervous system, Izuku thought aloud, erasing his previous search result and typing another. The articles that came up this time were much more informative but were complicated reads. They almost gave Izuku a headache, which reminded him that the previous headache he'd gotten by activating his quirk had faded away. Seeing as he was mostly okay again, Izuku activated his quirk. He'd only done it to train his quirk a bit more. The more he'd have it activated, the longer he'd be able to go without developing a strong migraine. It was in this instance of activation that Izuku noticed something new with his left eye. The perception rate was still enhanced, and while Izuku's body couldn't match it, his mind could. The articles he thought he'd have to spend the next couple of hours reading. All it took was a small glimpse and they were ingrained into his memory. He could read them faster than reading at normal perception. Shocked, Izuku deactivated his quirk, surprised at the sudden wealth of information within his head. The information he remembered. Wait, information that he remembered. Holy crap. Leaping up in excitement from the new development, he wondered just how far these applications could go while also thinking about the new information about the quirk nervous system he'd read about. He activated his quirk to find his mom and rushed off to let her know about the new development, keeping it activated all the while. The quirk nervous system was entirely theoretical. It didn't exist in the traditional sense within the body as nerves and organs did. Human dissection wouldn't reveal the nervous system, although there were plenty of theories that going deeper into the decoding of the quirk factor gene might reveal more secrets about how the quirk nervous system acted. There were several sketches with theories about how the network worked, and they weren't that far off from what he'd seen when he'd looked at his mom. These pathways had been theorized to exist within specific points in the body that, when struck by the correct type of quirk, temporarily blocked access to the next point. In short, if those points got clogged up like a big large highway pile-up, then it could theoretically slow down or even disable the quirk in the area of the body immediately surrounding that point. There were theories that this was how pro-hero Twilight Blaze had been killed by the villain Aleoquencher in America. Videos of their fight saw Twilight get hit in an area of the body that matched up with one of these supposed quirk points, causing his quirk to suddenly sputter to a stop. The dark flame quirk he had masterful control of had simply gone out at a crucial point in the fight. While Twilight Blaze had been stunned and continued to try and activate his quirk, a Leo Quencher had merely gotten up and sliced off his arm, followed by a flurry of vicious stabs into his chest with their electric sword quirk, before fleeing the scene. Due to the nature of the video, it was quite hard to find the video on the web, and it was by sheer luck and horror that Izuku stumbled upon it. As Izuku turned into the kitchen, he spotted his mother dicing away with a knife at some herbs. He was fascinated as he watched her work with his left eye. The movements were slowed down and he could see every little minute detail, even the twitch of her muscles as she went to adjust her grip on the herbs. Wait, he had seen that movement before she'd done the action, just like with Ka. No, it was Bakugo now, had kicked him in the park. As he deactivated his quirk, those muscle movements suddenly felt very ingrained within him. Somehow, Izuku just knew that if he picked up that knife he'd be able to cut away at the herbs just as easily. He had to see if his hunch was correct. "Mom, I think I just discovered something new about my quirk. Can I try using the knife to cut the herbs?" he asked. Inko Midoriya was surprised by her son's question, but she assumed it had only been a matter of time. Izuku had been kept very busy the last few weeks. Now that things had calmed down and they were all moved in, it made sense that he'd want to figure out what his quirk did. She'd never let Izuku help out in the kitchen. He was a bit too small to reach into the sink easily, much less the countertop where she was dicing the herbs. She bit her lip but ultimately succumbed to the pleading look her son was giving her. "All right, Izuku, but I'll have to hold you so you can reach the cutting board." "Come on." Inko relented as she picked up her boy. He was getting a bit too heavy to always be carrying around now. When she was younger she'd used to float him from the ground into her hands, but that just wasn't possible anymore. With a firm grip on her son's waist, she watched in fascination as Izuku picked up the knife she'd been using to cut some parsley and started dicing away at the herbs. At first, it was tentative, but she was surprised by the cutting technique. His hands were a little too small to do the fancy twirls she could do with the knife in her hand, but the dicing motion he used matched her easily and the grip technique on the parsley was good as well. If she didn't know any better, Inko would have thought her son had been practicing with blades in the kitchen for a while now. So distracted was Inko by her son's technique that she failed to realize when he'd cut all the parsley up. A shame, she hadn't wanted to dice the whole plant up for one meal. She'd have to find other uses for it now. Still, as soon as Izuku put down the knife on the countertop, she set her son back on the floor. "So," she asked, excited to hear more about Izuku's cool quirk. "All right. So I was watching you dice up the parsley and it was in slow motion. I could make out all the movements in your hands and muscles easily. Then, when I saw the muscles in your hand twitch, I just knew that you were going to change your grip. Then you changed it. Next thing I just instinctively knew how to chop it like you were." Izuku mumbled, "I think, whatever I observe directly with that eye, it kind of gives me a copy of that information. Like, I was reading an article about quirk theory earlier and I was able to read it super fast. I remember every word from it. I could probably give you a lecture about it. Perfect memory. I wonder how long it'll last. Is there a time frame? If there isn't, then I think school might be a challenge for much longer. Not that it was to begin with, but maybe I can take university classes earlier than anticipated because of this." Izuku's mumble storm continued as he walked away and headed to his room, sitting at his desk, and opening Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume Me. There were a few lines already written in it, but Izuku spent the next few hours until dinner was ready filling in all the new information he'd learned. It was only after dinner that he realized there was one thing missing. His quirk needed a name. He immediately began to brainstorm. It was strange, the way his quirk worked. It was almost like he had two very different ocular quirks, so maybe he should start by naming each one and then determine the overall quirk name based on what he came up with. Izuku thought about his right eye first. Giving it some thought, he decided to go with Byakugan. All-seeing white eye seemed like the perfect descriptor for that half of his quirk. Izuku thought about the left eye next. It was a lot more complex than his Byakugan. Copy eye didn't seem like enough. Red eye sounded very plain. Devil eye was too villainous. In the Izuku decided on Sharingan, copy wheel eye. That left his quirk name. Although very unimaginative, he decided to go with Dojutsu, Sharingan and Byakugan. It was simple and explained to everyone what his quirk was about. Satisfied, Izuku gave the journal to his mom so she could update his findings and then headed to bed, satisfied with a good day's work. Izuku made very good use of his Sharingan in the weeks before the summer break ended and fall began. He wanted to learn as much as possible about quirk pathway theory, using his Byakugan to help him in his studies as well. With his mom's permission, he'd managed to draw an accurate quirk pathway system, or at least, how the quirk pathway system traveled around in her body. Through experimentation, the quirk pathway system would glow when a quirk was being activated, glowing brighter and brighter until a strain eventually developed. Overuse of a quirk was quite common in children first learning to use their quirks, but Inko, being a grown woman, had to use a different method of straining herself. She'd rapidly pulled books to herself out of a box and onto a shelf, starting with the smallest and building up to the largest. Not only did it help with unpacking, but it was also a test of stamina as she hadn't needed to pull something so frequently to herself in such a long time. In fact, after their testing, Izuku had discovered something else. The quirk pathway would flicker when it showed evidence of being strained and then go dark for a few minutes, during which a sweating Inko Midoriya was unable to use her quirk out of sheer exhaustion. After multiple experiments, going through multiple days, both Midoriyas had been surprised to find that Inko could float larger things to her. A couple of bricks had been her limit before, now she could pull 10 to her at once. Her quirk pathway system had also expanded slightly, the lines were a deeper blue, easier to distinguish with better definition than they had been before the training exercise. Straining the quirk pathway system had led to the system having to adapt to more vigorous usage, and it now took twice the time as before Inko grew tired of using her quirk. As fascinating as these discoveries about the quirk pathway were, they had to come to a halt once school resumed. Izuku had turned 7 over the summer and thankfully was the same age as the other second graders he was with. The school was a welcome change of pace for both mother and son. For Inko, it meant she had more time to relax. While Inko wanted to help her son as much as she could, she hadn't expected it would mean being the lab rat in his quirk pathways experiments. Hopefully, the onset of school will give her some much-needed time to herself. For Izuku, it was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Nabu Elementary School had Bakugo, but Daishi Elementary School didn't. Izuku was hoping for the best, he wanted to make new friends. It was this nervous excitement that led him to walk into his second-grade class. He'd been introduced to his second-grade homeroom teacher, Hirano Kaori. She was a squat woman with obvious laugh lines on her face. Her hair was starting to grow gray, and the only distinguishable features that made her stand out were her ears, which were long, thin, and pointed. They reminded Izuku of elf ears that he'd seen in an old pre-quirk fantasy movie involving a quest to destroy a ring. The movie had been captivating but the plot had been a little slow for the young child and he'd passed out before he could finish watching the movie. He regretted not finishing it as he stared at Hirano-sensei's ears. "Hello class, I hope you've enjoyed your summer break. Please settle down into your seats while we do the morning announcements. I know it's already halfway through the year but we've got ourselves a well-recommended transfer from Shizuoka Prefecture," Hirano-sensei began, quieting down the whole class as she spoke. Before turning to Izuku, "Why don't you go ahead and tell the class a little bit about yourself?" Izuku nodded, before stepping forward and giving a bow in greeting. "Hello everyone, my name is Midoriya Izuku. I am 7 years old and one day I want to become a hero just like All Might. Please take care of me," he said. There was a spattering of light clapping from a few students and Hirano-sensei. "My, that's a great goal to have Midoriya-kun. Why don't you take a seat next to Kirishima-kun while I prepare our activities for today?" Hirano-sensei said, pointing to an empty seat next to a boy with a set of black hair that was rather spiky on his head, who had jumped out of his chair and waved excitedly at Izuku at the mention of his name. "Kirishima-kun, could you be a dear and show Midoriya around the school for the day?" "Yeah, of course, sensei," Kirishima replied, sitting back down in his seat and turning to look at Izuku, who had by now taken his seat next to the energetic kid. "Yo, I'm Eijiro Kirishima, but Eijiro is fine by me. Dude, you were so manly up there, saying you want to be a hero. What's your quirk?" "Mine is hardening," Kirishima said excitedly, showing off his quirk by hardening his hand. Izuku was quite surprised by this sudden introduction by Eijiro. "Oh, please call me Izuku then," he quickly replied, before looking starstruck as he looked at Kirishima's activation of his quirk. "Whoa, that's such a cool quirk. You can be a hero with that." "I call my quirk dojutsu. As you can probably guess, I'm not blind, but when I activate my quirk my eyes get enhanced. My right eye can see through walls and gives me 360 degrees of vision, and my left eye as well. So far it lets me copy stuff, enhance my perception, and lets me memorize whatever I read. I'm still figuring it all out. I only awakened my quirk a couple of weeks ago." "A couple of weeks ago? Wow, that's pretty late, but it seems pretty worth it. It's an awesome quirk. You'll be a great hero with it," Kirishima replied, bouncing in his seat. "Yeah, everyone thought I was quirkless before. It's kinda why we moved. The bullying there was pretty bad," Izuku admitted shyly, wondering how Kirishima would react. He saw the boy frown and thought the worst for a moment before Eijiro spoke. "Dude, that is not manly. Quirks are cool and all, but that doesn't mean you can go around being mean to those that don't have one," he muttered, almost causing Izuku to break into tears at the words. The rest of his school day was quite uneventful. Kirishima led Izuku around the school to all the places of importance. Where to go to the bathroom, the lunchroom, the playground, the library, the school office. They eventually settled on having lunch on the roof, which had a few picnic tables and was surrounded by safety fencing. It gave them a great view of Ichinomiya, and they talked about all their favorite heroes while up there. "Nah, man, All Might is cool, but for me, Crimson Riot is the manliest hero, for sure," Kirishima said, a grin on his face as he talked about his favorite hero. "Crimson Riot? Oh yeah, is it 'cause he's got a hardening quirk like you do?" Izuku asked, agreeing with Kirishima that Crimson Riot was indeed a good hero, just nowhere on All Might's level. "Nah, it's 'cause he's a fearless hero. He always jumps into danger, even when his quirk isn't suited for the job. It's what makes him a real man," Kirishima praised, pumping his fist. Izuku couldn't help but give Kirishima a grin. Despite his eccentricities, somehow he could tell that they were going to be great friends. The two children spent the rest of their lunch break talking about heroes, before returning to class. At the end of the day, Izuku was quite happy to have made so many new friends, with Kirishima being the nicest of the lot he'd met. When Inko picked him up from school, she was relieved to see that Izuku had a smile on his face and was talking to another boy of similar age. "Hey Izuku, who is this?" she asked, curious to learn about her son's newest friend. "Oh, hey mom, this is my friend Kirishima Eijiro," Izuku said, with Kirishima giving a quick bow in greeting. "Hey, Midoriya-san, it's nice to meet you," Kirishima said, keeping a respectful tilt to his voice. "Nice to meet you as well, Kirishima-kun. Are you friends with my son?" Inko asked, curious to see if she should expect company soon. Bakugo might have ruined Izuku's chances of normalcy at Nabu Elementary School, but that wouldn't be the case here. She wanted her son to have as many friends as he could. "Yes, ma'am, we're in the same second grade class," Kirishima replied excitedly. "That's great to hear. Have you lived in Ichinomiya long?" "We've only recently moved here from Mustafu. Perhaps you'd like to stop by on the weekend and show Izuku around the town?" Inko asked. "Oh, yeah, that sounds like some fun. Can I have your phone number so my mom can talk to you about it?" Kirishima asked. After the exchange of information, the two new friends said their goodbyes, Kirishima heading to the playground to wait. According to him, his mother was always about an hour late leaving work, so he usually just hung around on the playground or in the library until she arrived. As the two Midoriya got into the car, Izuku couldn't help but feel more than a bit excited. The first day of his schooling had coincided with his first day at the ninjutsu dojo. As they pulled away from the school, they drove for several minutes into the more remote section of town. This dojo wasn't too far from their home, secluded away in some trees. Exiting the car, both Midoriyas were surprised at the size of the compound. A large stone fence blocked off much of the size of the minka. It was only after they walked past the fence did the true enormity of the compound made itself clear. A small forest led the way up to the minka, obscuring much of the garden, if there even was one to begin with. As far as Izuku could tell, the trees went right up to the house. Walking along the path incurred a sense of foreboding to Izuku. It felt like he was being watched. He now walked alone, his mom saying that the instructor had been firm that only the trainee could enter the compound properly, so she'd decided to wait in the car. The shadows of the trees, the way they loomed over him, the way they sending whistled, it was all spine-tingling. A creak of a far-off branch caused Izuku to freeze. He wasn't alone. He snapped his head in that direction but only saw a slight shadow running deeper into the forest. Instantly, he activated his quirk, spotting a person dressed in a shinobi shozuku watching his movements, but not from the direction of the sound. While the sound had come from Izuku's right, the person watching him was on the left side of the trees, camouflaging expertly with the foliage and shadows that only his quirk pathway network was the reason Izuku could see him. Calming down, Izuku continued on the path to the dojo. Eyes watching the right side of the path for any sound while using his Byakugan to keep tabs on the ninja watching him. He was almost to the door when he saw the ninja reach into a pocket and pull out what looked to be a few throwing stars. It was an action that took only half a second, but Izuku knew what they were for. As the throwing stars flew out of the man's hand, he hit the floor. With a thud, Izuku heard the sound of the stars hitting the door and then thunking to the ground. None of them pierced the door. They were all rubber. In the split second it took him hesitating to get up and flee from his attacker, Izuku had failed to account for the ninja attacking him. Instantly, he was bound in metal wire, making it impossible to move very much at all. Interesting quirk. I knew I had been spotted after I caused that noise in the forest, but your reaction time to me throwing these rubber stars was adequate. Good instinct, kid, a gruff, older male voice spoke. Izuku looked up at his assailant, surprised that the man who had taken him down looked to be in his 90s. The metal wire slackened around him, as the old man pulled down his face mask and looked him over. The name is Kamihara Shin. I'm the master of this dojo. You'll be my newest and last student for a while. That's the one criterion I have for students. If they can make it to the door without taking a hit, I'll teach them what I know. Dumbfounded, Izuku just watched the old man stroll into his home. He stopped when Izuku didn't immediately follow him. Come on, kid, it's impolite to keep your elders waiting, he called out lazily. Right, sensei, Izuku replied, getting his bearings and hurrying after his new teacher. Kamihara Shin was an interesting old man. Ninjutsu had been passed down through his family for generations. Kamihara Sensei's family were trained ninjas since the time that the Satomi clan ruled the Boso Peninsula. They carried out assassination, infiltration, and espionage on orders of their shogun, and maintained their traditions in the event they were ever needed once again. With the fall of society, much of old Japanese culture was lost, but the Kamihara clan had managed to remain isolated and now used their ninjutsu to train heroes. Now, you're 7 at the moment. Your mother has been adamant that you wish to pursue a life in heroics. I would like an explanation of all the facets of your quirk, Kamihara said, voice stern as Izuku nodded and got onto the training mats. I call my quirk Dojutsu, Sharingan and Byakugan. My right eye is a Byakugan. It provides me with an increased field of vision in 360 degrees, that goes through walls and can even go as far as to allow me to see the internals of a person's body, Izuku said, receiving a nod from Kamihara as he took in the information. The Sharingan, it enhances my perception of whatever it can directly see. Everything moves slower. I can predict actions based on muscle movements, and provides whatever I see to me as both photographic and muscle memory. Interesting, Kamihara said as he rubbed his chin in thought, before looking at his student. Midoriya, I've gotten an Edgeshot figurine somewhere in this house, use your Byakugan to find it. Izuku was startled by the command and gave a firm nod. Taking a breath, he activated his quirk. The moment his quirk activated, Izuku began to take in all his surroundings. However, he noticed something. Kamihara Sensei's body was being watched by his Sharingan, and his sensei was tensing. He saw the action before it happened. He reached across to a wooden training katana and leapt to his feet with an ease that shouldn't have been possible on such an old body, before sprinting at Izuku. The Sharingan saw him coming from a while away, but in real time the movements were almost too quick. It took all of Izuku's will to move his body away just in time before taking a hit. Good, now move quicker. Your quirk allows me to see me coming, but it seems your body can't quite keep up, can it? I'll continue attacking until you've found that figurine. You'll need to split your focus now, Midoriya. Kamihara cackled, and Izuku couldn't help but sweat drop at his sensei's energy. However, he kept light on his feet, while he continued to scan all around with his Byakugan. A sharp pain almost caused him to lose concentration, as his arms were whacked by the sword that Kamihara had swung at him. Move faster, Midoriya. Yes, sensei, Midoriya replied, stealing his gaze and moving even more quickly. Izuku stayed light on his feet, dodging, rolling, and diving, before finally finding that figurine. Master bedroom, on top of your wardrobe, he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Kamihara gave Izuku a grin as he loaded his katana. Good, I wasn't even moving as fast as these old bones allow, but you managed to avoid quite a few hits. Izuku was horrified by the fact this man could move even faster. Listen up, Midoriya. The first step with your training will be using that technique of yours to copy how I move. You won't be able to go as fast as me, but you had to have noticed that I hardly made a sound. Ninjas were stealthy assailants in the night. You'll need to step in a certain manner to emulate that stealthiness. Then I'll talk to you about the 4 forms of jutsu you'll learn under me. Each time we meet, we'll focus on one part of the 4, until you reach a level of mastery and skill where all 3 will be used in our lessons, Kamihara said to the panting Izuku. First, there is genjutsu. This aspect of ninjutsu focuses on how to mess with our opponent's mind. Why do you think warriors of old went into battle dressed as demons? It was to inspire fear. Messing with emotions and our enemy's senses are all part of being a good ninja. We remain balanced while unbalanced our opponents. Then there is kuji-kuri, the mental aspect of ninjutsu. This part is more focused on balancing ourselves, using the philosophy of hand seals to aid in our meditation and preparing for missions and battle. Next is bukijutsu. Ninjas of old used various tools for infiltration, espionage, and assassination. I will show you how to wield ninja weapons, use a disguise kit to make you look like an entirely different person, and what each other tool we ninjas tend to have at our disposal is for. Finally, there is taijutsu. This focuses more on training the body and the different forms we use in fights, as well as conditioning the body for stealth, flexibility, and agility. You might find this surprising, but some of the first things I'll be showing you is parkour, to teach you how to move around the natural environment easily while keeping your momentum. Izuku was surprised by all there was regarding ninjutsu but nodded eagerly. He was prepared to learn it all if it meant that he could be a great hero someday. All right, sensei, I'm ready to begin, Izuku said, pumping his fist in excitement. Nope, not today, Kamihara spoke, almost causing Izuku to face fault to the floor. Today was just to check to see if you were even worthy of being a student and to introduce ourselves. Our time is almost to an end on that as well. Instead, take a practice GI home with you. Next time come with a GI in a gym bag. I have a changing room you can use so you don't have to get your regular clothes all dirty. Alright, then sensei. I'll see you again in 2 days, Izuku said happily, excited that he'd been allowed to train under the guidance of the man. Very well then, Midoriya, Kamihara said, a grin on his face as he watched the youth run off, GI in hand, and out the door he went. With a sigh, he turned towards the depths of his home and walked until he reached his bedroom, and opened the door to the inside. His phone was resting on his desk, with a new notification blaring on the home screen as he opened it. Kamihara Shinya. So, how'd it go? Kamihara Shin. He'll do. Only managed to hit him once when I was testing how good his quirk worked. And boy, does he have an awesome quirk. Kamihara Shinya. Oh, Kamihara Shin. Yeah, the kid's got magic eyes. Can scout out a whole house while splitting his attention and seeing, and probably copying, all my attacks as they come before I hit him. The only reason I hit him at all is cause his body can't keep up with what he sees at all. Kamihara Shinya. Interesting. Kamihara Shin. Hey, the brat is just 7, you can't possibly be considering. Kamihara Shinya. Of course not, maybe in a few years he'll be ready then. We always could do with another junior intern at my agency. Kamihara Shin. The kid hasn't even survived a year of my training and you're already talking about recruitment. Kamihara Shinya. Do you think he will? Kamihara Shin. Kamihara Shinya. Kamihara Shin. Ah, yes brat. Kamihara Shinya. Point to me then. Now what do you want for dinner? Kamihara Shin. Whatever's good. With an exasperated sigh, Kamihara Shin couldn't help but look up to his wardrobe and give a fond smile at the edge-shot figurine displayed there proudly, the simple autograph on the base plate of the figure sparking quite a bit of joy within the older man as he looked it over. Life continued for Izuku Midoriya at a normal pace for the next several years. Under the advisement of Kamihara-sensei, he decided to postpone joining the karate dojo he'd been interested in. Students were expected to have a bit of martial arts training already before attending. The dojo served as a way to help people who already had some knowledge of martial arts to apply it in a day-to-day brawl or situation. After looking up some videos of the dojo, he could see that the publicized events, where students fought students, did indeed include more than what was typically offered through karate instruction. Kid, you made a good choice of dojos. My taijutsu will show you the forms of a few well-known martial arts: Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Wrestling, and Karate. However, I don't have any other students for you to learn how to use these styles practically in the field. A couple of years training with me and you'll be able to go toe-to-toe with the new entrants at that dojo. Sensei, I understand why I might need karate, judo, and Muay Thai, but why wrestling and jiu-jitsu? Izuku had asked. With karate and Muay Thai, you can keep your enemies at a distance and counteract with your whole body when there is an opening. With judo, you'll be using their strength against them. However, what happens if a villain gets the drop on you? Next thing you know you're on the ground. Your best attacks with Muay Thai and karate. Gone. With your enemy on top of you, there is no momentum or strength to redirect. Judo becomes useless too, therefore you must know how to survive on the ground, how to escape a grapple or tousle on the floor, and how to incapacitate a villain with a hold. You may think hero work is glorious, but sometimes it'll be either you or the villain. When that happens, Midoriya, don't be afraid to break an arm. Chokeholds are discouraged by the Hero Association, but in a life or dead battle, you do what you need to survive. No hero is infallible, not even All Might. They ended that session early. Izuku was distraught by the idea that his favorite hero, All Might, had been forced to kill. Arriving home, he looked up villain deaths caused by heroes and was surprised by the statistics. In events where heroes were met with deadly force by villains, 40% of villains were killed, and of the remaining 60%, only 10% were captured without injury to themselves. Heroes with flashier quirks or quirks more destructive in nature often had higher kill counts. All Might had one on his record, although records of the villain he had killed were almost impossible to find. Online forums speculated widely about what it might be, from accidentally killing someone when he was young and his quirk acted out, to a government conspiracy about an underworld boogeyman. Each theory was as outrageous as the next, unfortunately, so Izuku wasn't sure what to believe. Heroes like Endeavor had higher kill counts, in the double digits actually, but most of those were easy to track down, although only 3 of those deaths occurred at the scene of the crime the villains were committing. Burns became easily infected, and the severity of the burns Endeavor inflicted often meant those who were killed didn't die right away or in a very painless manner, often dying from the infection that set in while in recovery. Still, it had been an eye-opening experience for Izuku, who had taken Kamihara-sensei's words a lot more seriously from that point on. Kamihara-sensei was a rigorous sensei. When meditating, he would ask Midoriya introspective philosophical questions or present him with moral dilemmas. The moral dilemmas were more complicated ones to answer. They would usually be presented when Izuku was in the deepest throes of his meditation. According to Kamihara-sensei, Izuku needed to be able to quickly think about what to do in a high-stress situation while remaining in balance with himself. Some of these moral dilemmas got Izuku to think about what he could do to be a better hero. As he got better at navigating the moral dilemmas, they eventually evolved into high-stress scenarios. Villain attacks where large amounts of civilians were in danger and how to navigate them with the least amount of casualties, scenarios where he was taking on multiple villains at once, scenarios where he was caught in an infiltration mission, and many more. Izuku had to navigate them while trying to keep an internal balance between his rational thoughts and his emotional responses. It was tough for the 7-year-old to admit that he wouldn't be able to save everyone if they were in danger from a villain, and, unfortunately for Izuku, he had tried to at first in many of his scenarios. Midoriya, you do not have the strength and speed of All Might. You do not have the firepower of a strong hero like Ryuku or Endeavor. Nor do you have the same versatility as heroes like Hawks or Edgeshot. Play to your strengths. Your Byakugan can scout out battle zones for civilians a lot more easily than any of the heroes I just mentioned, while your Sharingan will be good for dealing with villains who are on the slower side, at least until you get your speed up. Other than that, Izuku found that he quite enjoyed Kuji-Kuri. He practiced the meditation at home before bed, and it had helped with keeping any bad dreams away and helped him sleep a lot easier. The hand motions, while Izuku initially failed to see their benefits, he noticed began to help build the dexterity of his hands and fingers, allowing them to stretch in ways he wouldn't have been able to imagine before. These daily practices of hand signs proved invaluable when they started taijutsu training. Taijutsu training was much more rigorous. It didn't involve a lot of sparring, at least not at first. First, it was just learning how to fall correctly, using the momentum of your fall to carry you to your feet or to reduce the impact. Then balance and flexibility were focused on. At one point they even went to a trampoline park and got Izuku to practice maintaining coordination while flipping through the air. From there it escalated to learning how to navigate an environment, and parkour was added into the mix. Rolling to reduce the impact of a jump, efficient navigation of the environment during a chase, wall running to go up walls or travel along them to clear obstacles or gaps, and even jumping onto precise locations at a distance. Even quick thinking and reaction speed were improved upon. It was only when Kamihara-sensei deemed him adequate that he started to be shown forms. With his Sharingan, the forms came very easily. Izuku was shown once and he could replicate them perfectly. Thus, when they began to spar, there was a focus on application instead of technique. The Sharingan gave Izuku great technique, but the application was foreign to the young boy. He'd never been in an even fight before. He didn't consider Bakugo beatdowns to be even fights at least. Therefore the spars helped Izuku learn how to use the forms. Frequently, Kamihara-sensei would get his busy grandson to come and spar with him. Kamihara Shinya was a nice young man in his mid-20s. His hair was silver, but Izuku suspected it was that color by design and not due to his quirk or age. Shinya-sensei had an easygoing sense about him, often arriving late to a session with grocery bags in hand. He worked in Tokyo proper and only occasionally visited his grandfather, which explained why he was often absent. Izuku suspected he was a pro-hero but couldn't tell just who it was. The quirk pathway system was fairly developed, more so than even Kamihara-sensei's, suggesting constant use and extensive quirk training. Shinya-sensei, as he had insisted he be called to differentiate himself from his grandfather, was a skilled master of ninjutsu who always managed to get the drop on Izuku when his Byakugan wasn't active. He was quick, nimble, and exceedingly fast in such a way that Izuku wasn't quite sure if he had some sort of enhancement quirk. He suspected it wasn't the case, as Kamihara-sensei's quirk was something called 2D image, which let him flatten his body onto a 2D surface as long as that object had a large enough surface area to contain his body. It was a pretty awesome stealth quirk that came with Midoriya, focus, Shinya-sensei barked, as he threw a punch that Izuku had to struggle to dodge. During spars he wasn't allowed to use his quirk most of the time. The reasoning was sound to Izuku. His dojutsu, while an amazing quirk, was limited in the sense that it skewed Izuku's sense of perception. If Izuku grew used to fighting with only his quirk activated, he'd struggle in situations when he was blinded or couldn't keep his quirk activated for prolonged periods. It was better to have his body build up its natural speed, before including the benefits the Sharingan granted in terms of Izuku's enhanced perception. Izuku found a lot of the fighting styles to be a bit more unnatural for him. By his nature, he wasn't very confrontational, choosing a more defensive fighting style focused on evasion and quick hits to wear down the opponent, before finishing when a decisive opening appeared that allowed for a big hit. Bukijutsu training was a different experience for Izuku. He was unsure if using weapons was ideal for a hero, and he even brought it up with Kamihara-sensei. Listen, kid, just because you have a sword or a knife in hand, doesn't mean you have to resort to deadly force with it from the start. Use that head of yours and think for a moment. A knife is a good tool to have in hand to put villains on the defensive, and there are plenty of places on the body that won't kill someone right away. Know where the major arteries and internal organs are and you'll be able to use them effectively on a villain without going for the brutal option from the start. Not only that, but a knife is a handy tool, just a general, helping you escape bindings or cut away pieces of the environment might need to make use of in a survival situation. Bukijutsu was a large category to cover. The first thing they began with was focusing on human biology, where the internal organs were, where the major arteries were, and which locations were susceptible to blunt force trauma. They even covered how to treat different types of wounds, how to apply basic first aid, and even resuscitate someone with CPR. This helped alleviate Izuku's worries about using weapons somewhat. After that came Shuriken Jutsu. They spent quite a lot of time on this section. Izuku was taught how to handle a kunai, which functioned very similarly to a dagger, how to throw one accurately, and even ways to use it in survival situations. He learned to throw shurikens and hyper-density seals as well. Izuku ended up preferring the shurikens to the hyper-density seals. The seals were a pain to carry around, and until Izuku built up some strength, they were harder to throw as well. Sure, Shinya-sensei had shown him how powerfully hitting a strong hit could go with them, but they lacked any way to manipulate them after they were thrown. They were hard-hitting, but their trajectory varied little while in flight, always a straight line that was difficult to manipulate with anything other than ninja wire. Shuriken in comparison were much easier to manipulate, and with his Sharingan, Izuku was easily able to chain multiple shurikens to bounce off each other in midair to hit other targets, or even act as an improvised bola with some ninja wire. When given the choice between Kenjutsu and Bojutsu, Izuku decided learning the bow staff would be more applicable to hero work. There weren't very many situations in hero work where a sword was applicable. A bow staff was safer to use when taking down villains, and Izuku was already brainstorming the additional features he could incorporate into one. It wouldn't be a stretch to have a taser on the ends of the staff, or even have a bow staff that, with some clever engineering, could swap into a pair of tonfas. He'd certainly seen crazier support items for heroes. Granted, Izuku had to learn the tonfas at home and on his own time, as they weren't traditionally used in ninjutsu. For his genjutsu training, Izuku was surprised by some of the tactics he was trained in. He was shown how to operate circuit breakers to cut the power in a building, cutting off the sense of sight in the process for villains. How to mix drugs and poisons that were tasteless and would knock a person unconscious, utilize explosions to affect someone's hearing, glue traps, and slimes to mess with their sense of touch, and even smell was used as a weapon. Fragrances that would make him come off as approachable, or scents that could hide his scent from those who were following him. The final bit of genjutsu training involved messing with a person's emotions. Izuku had to learn to analyze people's personalities for emotions to exploit. People who are angry or facing inner turmoil and self-doubts are not balanced Midoriya. Maintain your balance, and skew the balance they try to maintain. Even if you must say something hateful to provoke, or cruel to discourage. Once the enemy is unbalanced, they have let their emotions control their actions. No longer will you be facing an opponent of sound mind, no, it will be a fight of beast and man, Shinya-sensei had said, after a spar where Izuku had given into his frustrations. The final bit Izuku was taught was infiltration and espionage. There will be times when villains will organize or are covering their tracks very well. In these cases, you may be forced to go undercover kid. Just being around them might net you some good information, but the real gold mine is going to be on their devices. A lot of that is password protected, but with a good brain like yours, learning to hack should be no issue. Of course, you gotta make sure to hide your identity as well. Shinya will teach you all about that. I'm too old to be putting on makeup, Kamihara-sensei had said when they reached this portion of the training. While Izuku's training was rigorous, his life revolved around more than just getting stronger. There was school after all. Izuku and Eijiro were thick as thieves. While they both took their studies seriously, Izuku more than Kirishima, they knew how to have fun as well. The two boys were very well liked by the staff at Daishi Elementary, and Izuku was surprised to find himself being one of the popular boys. He'd blushed tremendously when he received a few Valentine's Day chocolates. Most were obligatory of course, but one had been left on his desk from a secret admirer, and it had been well made as well. This had sent the rumor mill going crazy for a few weeks, especially since no one could tell who had given the chocolate to Izuku. While Izuku was quite young, he still knew the significance that such chocolate meant. Someone, probably a girl, liked him. Liked him. It was quite surprising, and though he'd asked around, he'd never figured out just who had placed the chocolate heart on his desk. Kirishima, for his part, had simply grinned and exclaimed, "Dude, whoever left you this chocolate, they've got to be super manly." At this moment, Izuku could have sworn he heard an eep sound from the hallway, but when he glanced over, he hadn't seen anyone standing around or walking by. When the chocolate hearts continued to appear over the years, Izuku knew that they had come from the same person, but had failed to figure out just who was giving him these hearts. All he knew was that they were always on his desk when he arrived at school each Valentine's Day. One day, Izuku had decided to make his own chocolate heart. It was rather abnormal, as the girls were the ones who usually went through the effort of giving out the hearts. However, he was determined to thank the person who had held such strong feelings throughout the year, especially since it was their final year in elementary school. Before leaving for school the day before Valentine's Day, he'd taken out his heart and left it at his desk. If the pattern held, then in the morning the person who had made the hearts would see it as they dropped it off. He left a tiny note on top of his parcel. "To my secret admirer, I admire you too." While Izuku had never met the person who made the hearts, he could respect that they had gone through all the effort to make those chocolates, without asking for anything in return. Sure, he was a bit too young to be interested in anyone romantically, but it just felt right that he should leave such a note behind for his admirer. In the morning, he found his gift had been received. With a simple, "Thank you," scribbled on top of his latest gift, Izuku knew that with his Byakugan he could identify who had received his own chocolate heart, but had ultimately decided against it. This person was taking their time in approaching Izuku, and he could respect that very much. Besides, he would lie to himself if he admitted that he didn't enjoy the suspense that built each year his admirer went undiscovered. Izuku would wait until their confidence grew enough to approach him. Izuku and Kirishima were hanging out on one busy autumn evening, Kirishima having been allowed to sleep over for the weekend. He'd carried a worried expression and had been taking glances at Izuku from time to time, obviously wanting to talk about something with his best friend but unsure how to bring it up. It was only after the third time that Izuku had decimated him in a video game they were playing that Izuku finally broke the tension. "Gee, you're worrying me. 3 straight rounds against your main and you're playing about as well as if it was the first time you'd picked up the controller. Tell me what's up," Izuku asked, curiosity and worry highlighted on his features. Kirishima, for his part, sighed as he put the controller down and flopped onto his back. "Dad got a promotion," Kirishima finally spoke, his voice in a weird tilt. "Really? Kirishima, that's great," Izuku exclaimed in happy surprise before being cut off by Kirishima's next words. "His company is offering a sweet deal on a high-rise in Shizuoka. We're moving during the winter break. I'll be going to Mustafa Private Middle School at the beginning of next term," Kirishima said, voice expression the dejection he felt. Eijiro and Izuku were both as close as brothers, and to heart that they wouldn't be going to middle school together was crushing both Eijiro up inside. "What?" Midoriya asked, confusion apparent on his face as it took him a few seconds to comprehend the life-changing sentences his best friend had just spoken. "Yeah, same," Eijiro said, giving a humorless chuckle in response. The boys sat there in silence. Kirishima was waiting for Izuku's reaction. Izuku was sitting there contemplating. "It isn't ideal, but we may be able to meet up again on the weekends. I'll be heading into Chiba City to a new dojo come springtime on the weekends, so maybe we can meet up then." "It's not ideal, but we can make it work. Our moms already have each other numbers, and Mom was talking about getting me a phone as a middle school present, so we can keep in contact and talk on the weekends," and Izuku's rambling was cut off, as Eijiro placed a hand over his mouth. An apologetic look came over Izuku's eyes as Eijiro looked at him, stupefied by the information Izuku was expelling. "Wait, you're not sad?" Kirishima asked, a look of confusion coming over the other boy's features. "Gee, of course I am. I won't get to see the one person I can call brother every day anymore. You're my best friend, and it's going to suck not having you in my middle school classes, but there's still plenty of ways to keep in contact with each other. Shizuoka is a far train ride but not an impossible one. I'm sure Mom will let me come over every other weekend or something. A little distance won't tear down our friendship. I promise, Izuku declared as Eijiro removed his hand. Kirishima looked at Izuku quietly for a few moments, before tears started leaking from his eyes and down his face. Kirishima stretched over and hugged Izuku, as he cried into his friend's shoulder. Have I told you, just how manly you are, Izu, Kirishima said as he pulled away, wiping the few stray tears left on his face away. Only once or twice today. It's how I knew besides your terrible gaming that something was wrong, Izuku readily admitted with a cheeky laugh. Kirishima couldn't help but bark out a laugh as well, giving Izuku's shoulder a soft punch as well, before the two returned to their gaming. Their worries soon being left forgotten as they returned to their gaming. The two friends were sure that nothing would split their friendship apart. Izuku ducked a kick sent at him by Shinya-sensei. This was his first ninjutsu lesson since his talk with Kirishima, and he wanted to go all out in a spar. Shinya-sensei had allowed the use of his quirk and had come at Izuku with a ferocity that Izuku hadn't been expecting, but their training had been paying off. It was obvious that Shinya-sensei wasn't moving at full speed, those attacks were usually unavoidable. However, the speed he was moving was challenging Izuku. Sweat poured down the boy's face as he took in the two jabs Shinya-sensei was prepping, only moving his body aside in the nick of time as they brushed past his hair. It was strange to imagine that a blow like that a year ago would have hit him. Taking advantage of the opening, Izuku had moved in on Shinya-sensei's exposed side, delivering a strong sidekick that put his teacher on the retreat. Shinya gave Izuku an approving nod before he sent a right cross at Izuku, but the tensing muscles in his legs meant a kick was inbound, so it had to be a feint. As Izuku readied himself to reposition away from the kick, the expected kick never came and he was punched in the face instead, it likely being thanks to the headgear they were wearing that he wouldn't bruise. Those eyes can still be tricked, Izuku, stay alert. Shinya-sensei barked, as he gave Izuku time to recover. Izuku spent a few seconds panting on the ground, feeling frustrated that he'd let himself get caught by the double feint. He had to get stronger, he couldn't stay down. It was just him now. With Kirishima gone, soon I'll be alone again. I have to be strong so that no one calls me useless again. The determination to keep fighting, the frustration in his weakness, the desperation to never be called useless again, and the utter love he felt for his brother in all but name Kirishima had mixed into a potent cocktail. One that Izuku would later be unable to explain. At that moment, the veins around his Byakugan swelled a little more, while a second Tomo wheeled out of his Sharingan. It was a slight change, not immediately noticed by the older instructors, nor had Izuku even realized anything had happened. At that moment, he just knew that he was stronger. He launched himself at Shinya-sensei, whose movements had become almost slow to Izuku. The tell of his actions was more obvious and broadcast to Izuku in a way that he saw Shinya-sensei's attacks coming seemingly an eternity before they happened. Izuku let out a roadhouse kick to put his sensei on the defensive, before closing in to deliver a quick jab. While he wasn't moving any faster than usual, the newfound confidence he gained as he attacked, and the ease with which he was able to dodge, had surprised Shinya, leaving an opening for Izuku to exploit. Shinya ducked to the side to avoid the jab, and let out a startled gasp as a slight graze tore and numbed up his brachioradialis. At the exclaim of pain from his teacher, Izuku backed off, worried as for the first time he noticed that the quirk pathway system in his hands had been flaring up when they hit his sensei's arm. As he studied his sensei's arm, he noticed that the quirk pathway system wasn't circulating the same energy as freely as before. Shinya for their part was more surprised than hurt by the attack. His arm was already starting to bruise, but he'd honestly received worse injuries in his day job. The pain from this strike was nothing in comparison. Relax, Midoriya, just some bruising, I've had worse, Shinya said, trying to get his student, who looked on the verge of tears, to relax. But sir, your quirk pathway system. I think I heard it. Izuku exclaimed, looking ready to bawl. Shinya couldn't help but look into his student's eyes, confused by what he meant by that. Quirk what? No, whatever Shinya had been about to say was cut off as he noticed the change in his student's eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. His Byakugan had the veins around it swelling much larger than before, and the Sharingan had another tomo. Midoriya. Yes, sensei. Congrats, you've undergone a quirk awakening. Quirk awakenings were rare. They were usually the hidden potential of a quirk revealing themselves during moments of extreme stress and life-threatening danger. Therefore, a simple dojo spar shouldn't have resulted in a quirk awakening. It didn't make any sense. Izuku's life hadn't been in danger in his spar with Shinya-sensei. While he was feeling a bit stressed out that his friend was moving away and had been high on his emotions during the spar, it wasn't comparable to the extreme stress that the rare people who underwent a quirk awakening experienced. The visit to a quirk therapist after practice had confirmed their thoughts. It just wasn't comparable. If people awakened their quirk every time they were emotional, they would be happening all the time. The therapist had therefore come to a conclusion based on what Izuku had told him about everything leading up to his quirk awakening. Izuku's quirk must naturally undergo small awakenings over time, or perhaps when he felt a strong emotion similar in scope to the ones Izuku had felt during that spar. Either way, the therapist had concluded that another quirk awakening, while unlikely, was possible in the future, and that his office was always available to help train the new abilities quirk awakenings could generate. As far as Izuku could tell, his Sharingan's perception and analysis abilities had improved by leaps and bounds. When testing his quirk out against Shinya-sensei, he could see the way his muscle had first started to flex, then contract, use of the contraction to determine the angle of attack, all before the limb had even actually moved in real time. Even the feints that he'd tried dodging before were less obvious. Things as simple as eye movements were factored in when making predictions. Advanced stances that he'd struggled to mimic were suddenly easily copied by his quirk as well. The eye now held two tomos orbiting the pupil, which was the only change physically Izuku had noticed since first awakening his quirk. Unlike his Sharingan, his Byakugan hadn't changed much. Over the years, Izuku had upped his range of viewing to half a kilometer, but the quirk awakening hadn't seemed to increase his range any more than it had before. Instead, Izuku had picked up changes with his quirk pathway system. It had seemingly advanced itself. While before, the system had traveled through his body naturally, there seemed to be points along the system that were easier to see, not just for himself but for others as well. Since Izuku couldn't find any substantial reading on the web, he'd decided to call them tenketsu. Interestingly, some quirk energy inside Izuku could be expelled through these tenketsu. It did result in a slightly burning feeling, and put a larger strain on his eyes the longer he held up the expulsion of quirk energy, but the quirk energy that Izuku could expel seemed to have various strange properties. With the help of the therapist, they'd discovered that the quirk energy would flare harshly against non-native quirk energy, attacking the source viciously. Like a white blood cell, it seemed to recognize which quirk energy was Izuku's and which quirk energy wasn't. It was likely what blocked up Shinya-sensei's quirk temporarily during their spar now that Izuku thought about it. It also meant Izuku had to be cautious about how he used it in a fight. Testing out strikes with quirk energy-infused palms and kicks had resulted in a training dummy losing its head, and had almost put a trainer in the hospital when Izuku had struck past their scaled armor quirk and ruptured their internals and quirk pathway system. Against people, his quirk had lethal implications, but the quirk therapist seemed pleased that Izuku was already involved in a form of physical activity. He had stressed that Izuku not partake in any spars using quirks until he had a better hand at preventing the quirk energy flare-ups. It also had the potential to possibly act as a mild full-body strength-enhancing quirk, as while Izuku had put in a lot of work before, the last thing he wanted was to kick someone's head off in a real fight. Thus, Izuku spent the winter training his control and meditation. He would focus on meditating before doing some shadow boxing with his quirk activated, focusing on internalizing the quirk energy that had seemed desperate to flare out of his body. It was tough, as Izuku had to fight hard with himself not to be discouraged when he would step forward to kick and jump a meter forward instead. It was only thanks to his teachings from Kamihara-sensei and Shinya-sensei, along with the support of Kirishima, that Izuku was able to continue as well as he did. When Izuku wasn't at the dojo or home, he made sure to visit with Kirishima. The two friends could feel the anticipation leading up to the upcoming move, the phone calls with Banks Eijiro's parents were making, the moving boxes being brought in to prepare for the move in the spring, and even the sale of unwanted items that were no longer needed in the new home they were going to. The two families decided to celebrate Christmas together, during which Izuku finally got the promised phone from his mother. It already came with his mom in the contacts, but approximately 2 seconds after turning it on, Izuku had gotten Eijiro's number. The new year brought some new changes to Izuku. His senseis at the dojo had given Izuku a set of graduation equipment, deeming him worthy of the title ninja. It was an event with as appropriately little fanfare, providing Izuku with a face shawl to hide his face, some smoke bombs, a set of sharpened kunai and shuriken, some ninja wire, and a disguise kit, complete with makeup and a wig, which Kirishima had called manly for having the guts to know how to use, and finally a laptop of all things, so Izuku could continue to practice his coding, which would help with his hacking skills. Izuku had been extremely grateful for the gift and had promised to make good use of the items when he became a hero. Already he had plans for how to implement most of the materials into a kit for a possible future hero costume. When the day of young romances came along, Izuku had left his chocolate heart on his desk like he had the year before, but was surprised and discouraged when he arrived the following day to find his heart still sitting on his desk, and with no other heart in sight. It had been slightly discouraging, but perhaps the person who had left them those wonderful chocolates had already graduated. Putting away the chocolate heart he had worked on, he instead focused on his classes for the day. When classes were let out for the day, he split off from Kirishima, deciding to take advantage of the mild weather and walk home. As Izuku was beginning his trek home, another girl was finding her courage. She'd watched in the background the last few years, protected by the anonymity that came with being in another class. She'd never thought to have the confidence to confess her feelings, always choosing to write a short note to go along with the chocolate heart her dad had done his best to help her make. It wasn't anything fancy, and neither she nor dad thought they were the best chocolatiers around, but they'd made it work, somehow. Well, the first few attempts had been rather disastrous truthfully, and she'd chased off dad when she began to suspect sabotage so he could keep all the hearts they messed up. As if dad ever had needed a chocolate heart for her to express her love. Truthfully, neither of them expected her to develop a childhood crush, but there was something about Midoriya Izuku that just stood out. He was friendly and kind with everyone, humble about how awesome his quirk was, and he'd seen him showing karate moves to his friend Eijiro after school a couple of times, which was pretty kick-ass in her opinion. There was just a flux of understanding and kindness within the boy that had drawn her in. A crush, her dad had explained, looking solemn, as if he was losing someone precious to him before his gaze had turned fond instead. Our little girl has her first crush already, Suzume, he had said, looking to their shrine where a picture of her mother, who had gone missing shortly after her birth. No one knew what happened to her, and the case had long gone cold. Dad held out hope. Sometimes he would stop and look at her as if he was seeing a ghost, something she'd done bringing up bittersweet memories. As the years had gone by, she'd been content, admiring how Izuku would make everyone laugh and smile. Dodging any attempts of his to discover who was the one leaving the chocolates. She was sure he knew that none of the girls in his class had left the chocolate. A lot of girls her age would squeal and blush about a boy they liked, but playing poker with dad meant she'd learn to keep up a mean poker face, and she did her best to ignore all the rumors. The only time anything had slipped by was when she'd gone to deliver her chocolate in the early morning, only to discover one waiting for her. She'd quickly hidden it in her backpack and had been slightly more nervous the rest of the day, thinking he'd found out something. The rumors in school said Midoriya could see everything with his ocular quirk, and she was worried he'd use it to find out she had the heart. However, he never confronted her. As she had read aloud the note he had left her, a determination had sprung over her. By next Valentine's Day, she'd present her heart in person. She'd lost the confidence to approach him in the morning, spotting a dejected expression on his face when she'd passed by his desk in the morning. While he received plenty of complimentary chocolates from students in his class, perhaps he had missed not receiving her own. Thus this was her final shot. Soon the school year would end. Would she even see Midoriya again after this final semester? Already she could barely make him out, getting farther from the school. She was lucky he hadn't taken any turns on his walk home, or she'd surely have lost sight of him by now. She started to pedal her bike, slowly at first, then building up speed. He needed to know. She needed to tell him. Her feet were a blur as she moved through the streets of Ichinomiya. Orange hair trailed behind her in that long ponytail she wore it in. It wasn't fancy by any means. Not having a mother figure growing up, she'd kept to a simple hairstyle. One that was easy to style in the morning and practical for everyday use. As the wind blew her hair back, she couldn't help but feel the rush of exhilaration, and she got closer to Midoriya. She let out a laugh that Midoriya seemingly heard as he tensed up, looking away from his phone. "Midoriya-san," she called out, a warning as she realized she was going fast. She hit the brakes and immediately tilted the bike left to drift it around as it slid. Wheels forward, while her leg kept her balanced and from toppling over. Midoriya hopped away just in time as she skidded by, a big grin on her face as she panted, looking at him with a determined look. Izuku hadn't expected a girl to call out his name on his walk home. He and Eijiro were usually the last ones left at school, and the school itself was pretty far away by now. He glanced back for a moment, eyes going wide as a girl his age was desperately trying to bring her bike to a stop. It was years of ninja training that allowed him to react quickly enough and move away as she performed a flawless Akira slide through the space he'd just been standing. Her face was flush as she steadied herself from the exertion of pedaling to catch up with him. Her orange hair, held up in a high ponytail on her left side, looked windswept and wild, in a nice sort of way. It was reminiscent of how wild Izuku's hair could become at times. Her teal eyes stared at him with a determined expression. Although she wore the Daishi Elementary School uniform, Izuku didn't recognize her straight away. Only vaguely recalling a few of the girls speaking with an organette in the halls before class on some occasions. However, the name of the orangette hadn't been brought up in class, least of all around Izuku. While he was certainly friendly with the girls in his class, he by no means spent his time around them participating in school gossip, preferring the energetic conversations about heroes with Kirishima and the other boys. The girls seemed to know who he was though, so Izuku held his tongue while she caught her breath. "Midoriya-san, I wanted to ask if we could be friends," she said, her voice sounding nervous before she steeled her expression. Midoriya was, needless to say, very caught off guard. When he didn't immediately reply, the girl's face heated up slightly. "Sorry, I was too bold. It's just that, well, I noticed you when you first started attending Daishi. Everyone says you're kind and want to be a hero, and I've even spotted you showing your friend, Kirishima-san, some karate moves after school. One of the girls overheard what you told Kirishima-san, about how people thought you were quirkless when you were little and how you had bullies at your old school. That was why I was surprised by how kind and humble you were with everyone. Despite how badly you'd been harmed before, it didn't put you down. You stayed positive and were always kind to everyone around you. Then, well, I'm not sure if you remember, but in 3rd grade, you stopped those older girls from messing with Mimiko-chan. All the girls knew what was going on, but we didn't do anything. We were scared that they were turning on us and we could only sit back and watch. Then you found out and got the teachers involved. They made them stop and those bullies got sent away. That was when I started to like you. I would leave you those chocolates on your desk every Valentine's Day, never expecting anything in return. I felt pretty worthless about the whole bullying ordeal with Mimiko-chan. She needed help but I kept quiet to stop anyone from hurting me. I knew I wasn't worthy enough to be your friend, but I still wanted to let you know how special you were to me," she said, a fond smile on her face. Izuku's face was also starting to heat up. He'd never had a girl speak to him like this. Sure, he'd heard gossip about how cute he was once, and his mom had called him handsome more than a few times, but that surely didn't count. Especially not when compared to the passionate speech being given now. "Then, last year ago today, I went to place my chocolate on your desk like I had before and found one waiting for me. You believe in me, despite never having known who I was," she continued, reaching into her bag and pulling out a large chocolate heart, before bowing and presenting the gift to Izuku. "So I made a promise to myself then, that I would give this one in person. So please, Midoriya-san, let me be your friend." With shaky hands, Midoriya accepted the well-made sweet, looking from the design to the girl, as if to confirm his findings. Yes, The heart matched the others, the only caveat being that the note on the package was different. From your not-so-secret admirer, Itsuka Kendo. He stared at the heart for another moment, before reaching into his pack and pulling out his own sweet, bowing and presenting his gift to her. Kendo took his gift, surprised to see that he'd gotten her another chocolate heart this year, before reading the note on the packaging. To my secret admirer, let's be friends, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku and Kendo ended up exchanging numbers and walking next to each other that day. They chose to spend their first day as friends at a local cafe. It was a rather date-like activity, at least that was what Izuku thought about it. Things were awkward at first. Izuku wasn't particularly sure about what to talk about with Kendo. They talked about their quirks at first, Izuku expressing how impressed he was with hers, even if Itsuka expressed she didn't think it was too useful. No way. If you can make your hands as big as you claim, you'll make an awesome pro. Your grapple techniques against villains would make you deadly, and transformation quirks like yours mean your hands are probably a lot more durable than the rest of your body. That means your punches are going to be super strong, a lot of villains won't expect the force you'll be dealing out. Plus, you can even use them for defense to keep the rest of your body safe. Moving wreckage with them would also, Izuku mumbled, causing Itsuka to gape for a few moments, then give him a fond smile. He had just broken down her quirk in seconds, analyzing a quirk she had thought had only simple applications and breaking it down for fierce ease. She sipped on her black coffee and just listened as Izuku rambled, not cutting him off but finding his enthusiasm rather cute. As he finally took a breath, seemingly only just realizing that he had expelled quite a bit of word vomit towards Izuku, Itsuka spoke. You're pretty awesome, Midoriya-kun. I always thought my quirk wasn't anything too impressive, but the way you talk about it, do you mean it? Can I be a great hero too? Of course, you can, Kendo-chan. Izuku said, a mad blush from his earlier mumble epiphany, and by the fact that honorifics had suddenly become a lot more lax. I think anyone can if they put in the effort. My quirk came in late, and a lot of classmates at my old school didn't believe me when I said I was a late bloomer, but, even if I had been born quirkless, I would have wanted to be a hero. I heard about that. Everyone at school says you have some cool ocular quirk, but that it didn't come in until 2nd grade, right? Itsuka asked, curious about the way Izuku's quirk worked. Oh, yeah, I call it dojutsu. My left eye is called Sharingan. It enhances how I perceive things, has predictive qualities, and lets me memorize everything it sees as if I had an eidetic memory. My Byakugan lets me see up to half a kilometer away in every direction. It can see through objects and even lets me see how a quirk flows through a person's body. I can also expel the quirk energy from my own body as an extra physical enhancement in a fight, letting me move a little bit more quickly, and hit a bit harder, and, if I channel the quirk energy in my hands correctly, I can also kind of counter out someone else's quirk temporarily, though I have to be careful because those strikes deal a lot of internal damage if I'm not careful, Izuku said, eager to talk about his quirk with someone else. Itsuka seemed to listen with avid attention, although there was obvious look at confusion at mentions of quirk pathway systems and quirk energy. That further led to more questions, and Izuku explained some more about his thoughts on quirk energy and quirk pathway systems. He was surprised by how easily Kendo kept up with the conversation, even introducing some new thoughts about it. Izuku was surprised just how much he enjoyed the conversation. Eventually, their talks switched to what they had planned for the rest of the year. Izuku was a bit relieved to hear that she was going to Ichinomiya Middle School. While many of his classmates at Daishi were going to Ichinomiya Middle, he didn't know the first thing about advancing his relationship with a girl, and he figured it would only get more difficult if schools split them up. His relationship with Itsuka was still rather new. She'd only expressed her want of friendship, but the specially crafted hearts in her previous message of being his secret admirer suggested that she liked him a lot more than friends. Was this stop at the cafe an impromptu date then? He wasn't going to ask his mom about it, maybe Eijiro would know. Or perhaps Kamihara-sensei. After they discussed their quirks, they moved on to another discussion. Kendo-chan, what kind of heroes do you like? He asked, curious to see where she drew some of her inspirations for being a hero. Well, my favorite is Yukio. She's an awesome lady hero, super strong, and pretty badass too. Then Mirko, of course. She's new to the scene but she's been climbing super fast, and she uses a quirk that not many people would think would be useful and takes it to the super cool extreme. Hawks is also amazing. He has a sense of ease about everything he does, you know. Like, it's not arrogance, but a sense of confidence that a lot of other heroes try to mimic by overcompensating in other areas, Itsuka said, eager to talk about her favorite heroes. Izuku could respect her choices. While Mirko wasn't a top 10 pro yet, at the rate she was climbing it wouldn't surprise him if she got there soon. Yukyu's quirk was also super strong and was well liked by a lot of heroines. Yeah, those heroes are super awesome picks. I used to be a bit of an All Might fanboy, but I've developed a bit of an appreciation for Yoroimusha and Edgeshot. Guess I have to blame my sensei for that. He's a huge fanboy, Izuku admitted. His Byakugan had unintentionally strayed to the hero collections his sensei had of the two heroes. His Yoroimusha collection was impressive but nothing in comparison to his Edgeshot collection, every piece of which was personally signed by his Edgeshot. It looked like he had every piece of memorabilia that had come out for Edgeshot too, as there were some Izuku had heard about being only rumors in his collection. Your sensei, do you practice martial arts as well? Itsuka asked him. Oh, yeah, I do. My sensei is Kamihara Shin, he's my ninjutsu instructor. My Sharingan lets me pick up a lot of martial arts easily, but it's putting what I learn into practice that he's helped me out with. He's also taught me a lot about ninja history and methodology that I hope to put into use when I become a hero, Izuku admitted, noticing that Itsuka had lit up a bit as he talked about martial arts. That's so cool. I knew we had a ninjutsu dojo around here, but I had no idea it would help a ton with hero prep. I've only been going to a karate and boxing dojo so far, but soon, I'll be going to Chiba City to Sugihara Mixed Martial Arts. It's a really good place to learn how to apply what you've learned, and gain some experience, Itsuka explained, causing Izuku to give her a radiant grin. Sugihara. That's the one I was planning on going to as well. I recently graduated from Kamihara Sensei's dojo, and it's the one I've been looking at for a while now, Izuku admitted, causing Itsuka to give him a broad smile. It would seem Izuku would be seeing a lot more Itsuka in the coming years, and he was very happy about it. As the end of March came, so did Kirishima's moving day. Everything was packed into the moving van and ready to head out. The Midoriyas stopped by and gave the Kirishimas a send-off, both boys giving each other big hugs and tearful goodbyes. They promised to continue to stay in contact, easier than ever now that both of them had phones, and Kirishima promised that he'd try to convince his parents to let him take the train ride into Chiba City at least once a month when he could. Once goodbyes were said, and the Kirishimas had left, Inko gave his son a tight hug. Oh, sweetie, I know you must feel crushed about Kirishima-kun leaving, but you'll still be brothers, and I've already arranged for Kirishima to come spend a week with us during the summer, Inko promised, as she gave her son a tight hug. Midoriya wiped his tears away. While he was sad that the Kirishimas were leaving, he couldn't help but feel that there was a lot to be happy about too. He and Eijiro's bond was stronger than ever, and their friendship would last, Izuku was sure of it. He'd also made a new friend, or at least she was a girl who liked Izuku and who Izuku also kind of liked. Were they dating? That was still up in the air. So while his best friend had gone, he couldn't help but be excited for what the future brought them. Eijiro couldn't help but feel so isolated upon beginning his schooling at Mustafa. He kept in contact with Izubro, but there were a lot of unfamiliar faces around. People didn't know him here, like they did at Daishi. Everyone was super competitive about the amazingness of their quirks too. The teachers paid less attention to the students, letting them run wild and with little constraints. Sure, there was still organization, but only very serious matters involving quirk usage were even vaguely paid attention to. In middle school, popularity was the name of the game, and Kirishima was just too plain to really stand out and make a name for himself here. Everywhere he looked, people's eyes glazed over him. That confidence he'd had Daishi started to disappear fairly quickly as he realized that amongst his new peers, he was a nobody. Everyone would hang out with the people they had been with in elementary, and Kirishima, being one of the few to transfer in at the beginning of the year from a farther district, stood out quite a bit. He'd done his best to be kind, but middle school was a dog-eat-dog world that he hadn't been expecting. Thus, the calm and confident personality he developed with the help of Izuku started to erode into one that was meek and quiet. He slouched around all over the place at school, and, as far as anyone else could tell, Kirishima was a loner. When you're the odd kid out, the world can be cruel. His peers started to call him plain, ordinary, and weird. He was the friendless nobody that no one wanted to hang out with, and people quickly learned to steer clear away from him because of it. Eijiro started counting the minutes in the day until school ended, desperate to leave and rush home. Outside of school, he kept up a mask of usual confidence. It was surprisingly easy. His parents were a lot busier now. Dad's new job came with new responsibilities, and he'd often get home late from work, tired and ready to sleep and repeat. His mother had decided to get a lot more involved in going to the gym, noticing her figure was starting to worsen as she got older. In the process, she'd made some new friends that had kept her busy and out of the house as well. If his parents noticed anything strange about the mask he wore, they never brought it up. The only time that Kirishima found himself happy was when he was about to take the train ride up to Chiba City to meet Izuku after his dojo practice. At first, it had been just him meeting Izuku. The two would hang out and go to the arcade and talk about everything. Izuku had asked some probing questions about how his new school was, and Kirishima only admitted that it was some getting used to, especially with it being a new district, before deflecting the question and asking about Izuku's newfound relationship. Because, yeah, his bro had a girlfriend. She was pretty badass, so Eijiro approved. Apparently she could keep up with Izuku in a hand-to-hand fight if quirks weren't on the table. Oh sure, the two of them danced around the subject plenty of times, but Eijiro wasn't sure why. Izuku had admitted to having gone on a date with her, and they were inseparable from the gossip Eijiro had picked up from a few other friends who had gone to Daishi and were now going to Ikinomiya Middle School. Izuku had even admitted that they'd exchange acknowledgement of feelings, ergo he had a girlfriend. Izuku had blushed but been adamant that they were still getting to know each other and hadn't developed that far along. Kirishima had to struggle to not roll his eyes at that statement. He'd only talked with Itsuka a couple of times and it was evident she was head over heels. It just seemed their unfamiliarity with relationships was the only thing halting progression. Thankfully he was able to maintain that mask around Izuku. He'd received suspicious glances, but considering Kirishima was the happiest around his brother, it was hard to tell that he was in a slump, even for Izuku. The summer visit with the Midoriyas was a welcome break from the troubles at school, and he even got to visit for Christmas since his parents were going to a dinner party being held by Dad's boss. When the new school year started, there was more pressure to succeed academically, so Kirishima flung himself into academics. He was able to make some new friends in the school year. The younger students, being initially unaware about school social groups, had allowed him to make buddies with some guys who liked to hit up the local arcade on occasion and talk about comics. It had been nice to be part of a friend group, but the students Kirishima's age still went out of their way to ignore him and make passive-aggressive comments about how he wouldn't stand out as a hero with such a plain quirk. Middle school was tough on Kirishima, but he was doing his best to keep it, finding comfort in his late-night talks with Izuku and the occasional visits to Chiba City. The third year of middle school brought a new surprise into Kirishima's life that he hadn't been expecting. A pink-skinned girl with pink hair and an acid quirk took the school by storm when she transferred in for her final year before high school. She was so happy and confident about everything that Kirishima couldn't help but look up to her a bit. Her high energy and intolerance towards school bullies made her pretty manly. Even the people who would look down on his quirk and his goals for UA started leaving him alone. Kirishima's dream of UA had been strong ever since meeting Izuku and promising to go there in high school to be heroes. He had the grades. As a kid, Izuku had even convinced Kirishima that he had a great quirk for hero work. Whenever someone commented on his quirk, Eijiro would always think back to that first meeting with Izuku. How strongly his bro had believed in his quirk for hero work. It was what let him walk away from those comments. However, his self-doubt had crawled back into his life, and seeing the new girl, Mina Ishido, school bullies and protect her friend in the face of a vast shady figure, had almost made him wonder if he could still be a hero. Izuku sat in a small cafe he'd managed to find in Chiba City. It was a nice place he'd visited plenty of times before with Itsuka. The decorations were plain, but it had a more personal feel than going to a Starbucks. The use of incense gave the plain decorations a very comfy, at-home feeling that was reflected in the clientele. People weren't rushing through to get their drink and leave, they were taking their time, talking with the workers or other guests, and sitting down to enjoy their drinks. He couldn't help but smile and look down at the warm mug of hot cocoa he'd ordered. Coffee was never his favorite. It kept him up too late, and when you have an ocular-based quirk, straining the eyes unnecessarily was usually bad in the long term. Over the last couple of years at Ikinomiya Middle School, life had been pretty great for him. He was recognized by a lot of students who couldn't afford a private education and had funneled there from Daishi Elementary School. Thankfully, he and Itsuka even shared the same homeroom class. The teachers were very friendly and accommodating, and the general attitude of the school was very reflective of small-town life. There was never a rush of boasting, just the general awkwardness of meeting some new people and getting to know your peers and their goals. Izuku had made some new friends, but none had developed the same connection with him as his friendship with Eijiro. He spent his afternoons regularly with Itsuka, feeling helplessly drawn in. Her smile was contagious, she was always so energetic. Izuku privately blamed the coffee she drank, black. She wasn't afraid to tussle and get dirty, the number of times she'd put him in the dirt during a spar bringing a fond smile to his face. Itsuka hated when someone looked down on her as well, a lesson Izuku had quickly learned when he'd hesitated in their first couple of spars. Never again. When the two of them weren't sparring or studying, they were spending time at her dad's auto shop. Mr. Kendo was a nice man. He'd taken one look at Izuku's clueless face when asked if he knew anything about cars, and had shown him the ropes. "My daughter ain't dating a kid who can't work with cars," had been his only response, and it had sent both Izuku and Itsuka into a blushing spree. Thankfully, Mr. Kendo didn't go out of his way to embarrass Izuku and was quite accommodating in teaching him about machinery. While not the first male role model in Izuku's life, Izuku still greatly respected what he was doing. With Izuku's dad having died when he was younger, there hadn't been another man to teach him about these kinds of things. Kamihara-sensei and Shinya-sensei, while his sensei, had only shown him a few things about cars, mostly how to break into them without making it obvious that they had been broken into. A villain can leave a lot of important info in vehicles, you should at least know how to get into one and snoop around it properly. Changing the oil, running maintenance on a vehicle, and even building an engine with Itsuka for her future motorbike were all things Izuku wouldn't have thought to have enjoyed before, but he had slowly found himself turning into a grease monkey. Mr. Kendo had even shown him how to drive, on a private track, of course, definitely not an abandoned parking lot. His time at Sugihara Mixed Martial Arts wasn't as instructional as Izuku had initially hoped. Tendo Iwami was a good sensei, but that was it. He'd helped Izuku polish up a bit on group fighting, but he wanted Izuku in the competition ring the moment he'd seen him fight. It was actually kind of annoying. After a few months of going, he stopped and decided to continue training with Kamihara-sensei at his dojo instead. Itsuka had been a bit disappointed, but she was naturally more competitive than Izuku and kept at it. He would escort her to Sugihara's every weekend, wait around in the city while she practiced, and then they'd either walk around the city or head back home. This was one of the occasions he was waiting for Itsuka to exit from Sugihara. The mid-February weather was still a bit chilly, but Chiba City didn't usually get snow in the winter, and today wasn't an exception. There was a brisk winter wind blowing through though that had made Izuku wrap himself up in warm clothes, and then been given Itsuka's scarf to wear while she did her training. A quick peck on the cheek and she'd been off into the dojo, leaving Izuku with a goofy grin on his face on the walk to the cafe, surprised to find her teal scarf almost matched his outfit. Was that on purpose? Yeah, okay, maybe he and Itsuka were dating. How to bring it up though? Did he even need to? Would she mind just dropping the word girlfriend in a casual conversation? There was something else Izuku had been feeling as he took a quick sip of his, still too hot to drink, cocoa. Relief. Izuku had received word that his written exam scores for the UA entrance exam had been very impressive, and he'd been invited to partake in the practical exam for the hero course on the 26th of February. Itsuka had also passed her exams, and he was just waiting to hear from Eijiro to see if he'd done well on his written exam too. That was his whole reason for waiting in the cafe, to begin with. The chime of the bell by the establishment's entrance let Izuku know the person he'd been waiting for was there. Eijiro Kirishima came in bundled up in a big black and red jacket. The bottom of his jeans looked a little waterlogged, like he'd taken a step into a puddle almost, and he was wearing a beanie over his head that left just a couple of strands of black hair poking out. "Hey bro," Eijiro said with a grin. In his hands he was holding a sealed letter, waving it around excitedly. "Eiji bro, it's been too long. Come on, let's see those results," Izuku replied and, noticing that Kirishima had a tad bit of hesitance on his face at that comment, continued with, "Come on man, I'm sure you passed." Kirishima quickly ordered a latte before taking a seat next to Izuku, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. Izuku had seen that bit of nervousness constantly in his friend's eyes lately, but he'd always been deflected away whenever he had asked. Izuku watched as Kirishima took the envelope and opened it up, pulling out the letter from inside. Taking a deep breath, he read through the letter carefully, a look of relief coming into his eyes as he finished. "Looks like I passed. My practical is on the 26th, same as you and Itsuka," Kirishima said, a sigh of relief escaping his mouth at those words. "Told you those study sessions were worth it," Izuku said, voice rising in excitement as he proclaimed, "We're just one step closer to being a hero." Kirishima gave Izuku a strained smile. "Izu bro, I don't know if I'm hero material," he admitted, causing Izuku to stop in his celebrations and give Kirishima a questioning stare. "Eijiro, where is this coming from? You passed the written exam, it's just the practical left. Of course, you can be an awesome hero," Izuku insisted, forgetting about his hot cocoa for now. "Yeah, I passed, but look, I haven't been honest with you about Mustafa. The kids there think my quirk is too plain and boring for hero work. I know you think it's awesome, but it sometimes feels like you're the only one in a sea of voices telling me differently. It's been messing with my confidence. I freeze up instead of helping out when I see students getting bullied now. Heck, a couple of months ago I just watched while this super big villain looking dude was scaring my classmates. I didn't do anything, I was just too scared. Instead, I watched while one of the girls he was bothering had to stand up to him and get him to go away. Heroes aren't supposed to be scared, we need to be courageous and manly," Kirishima said, a guilty expression coming over his face as he looked down at the table, holding his latte listlessly in his hands to keep them warm and feeling like an utter failure despite the good news about the practical. Izuku sat there, quiet and feeling a bit guilty himself. He hadn't realized just how hard Eijiro had it at Mustafa. It made him angry that he hadn't bothered to check in more often if he had been having such a hard time. "Eijiro, bro, you're wrong. Being a hero isn't about not being scared. It's acting despite your fear. Those classmates that had to deal with that big villain, do you think that they weren't scared? She must have been terrified if this villain was scary enough to get you to back down, but she put aside her fear and stood up to the villain. Eijiro, you're going to be an awesome hero one day, so stand tall and face that fear and insecurity like a man," Izuku said, voice slightly harsh but knowing that this was what had to be said to get Eijiro out of his funk. He had to duck his head in embarrassment when he noticed a few other guests were now giving the two curious looks. Eijiro smiled at Izuku, though it was strained. "I hear ya bro, it'll take some time to get that through my head," Kirishima admitted, glad when Izuku gave his shoulder a pat in comfort. "Take as long as you need man. Just remember, no matter what anyone else says, you're going to be an awesome hero," Izuku insisted. Kirishima looked a little happier after that and Izuku hoped that his friend had taken his words to heart. They enjoyed their drinks together, talking about what they expected the practical exam to be like. Izuku had done some internet sleuthing and had found a few forums where people who had taken the previous year's practical examinations were complaining about how unfair they were. It seemed like they'd had to fight some faux villain robots, but that didn't seem right to Izuku. There had to be more to the exam than just fighting robots. Not every quirk was geared toward battle after all. "Maybe they give points for manly actions?" Kirishima asked, eyes bright as his friend thought of the implication. Izuku, meanwhile, almost sweat drop at Eijiro's pondering. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, sure he was about to hear something about how brave you were as you took down a villain robot. "Well, it's pretty manly to protect others and help out when people are struggling." So maybe they give some points for that, Eijiro suggested. Izuku stopped and pondered that himself. You know, I think that makes a lot of sense. Heroes are more than just punching villains. They need to be able to protect others. There will likely be people who don't have good battle-oriented quirks in the practical. They need to be able to gain points somehow. Maybe by causing distractions so another examinee can take down a villain bot, or perhaps dragging another examinee away if they get defeated by one. I haven't found any information that doesn't say we can't work with others. While I doubt they'll put people from the same school district in the same test site, maybe you can convince another examinee to work with you to take down a villain bot. Izubro, mumble Storm, Eijiro chimed in helpfully, causing Izuku to turn into a blushing, stuttering mess, and Kirishima to burst out into a friendly laugh. Soon enough their drinks were finished up, and they returned to Sugihara to pick up Itsuka. She had a light sweat sheen going on still, but was ecstatic to hear that Kirishima was also going to be attending the practical. That's great to hear. We're all one step closer to UA. Her exclamation brought a smile to both boys' faces, and they decided to spend the day together at a local arcade to celebrate. Izuku felt immensely pleased when he managed to win enough tickets for a large UQ plush that he'd noticed Itsuka glancing at while they played games. The plush featured Yukio in her dragon form and was kind of adorable looking, the proportions purposefully off to enhance its cute factor. Best boyfriend ever, Itsuka said happily as she hugged Izuku, and then a quick kiss on the lips, being brief since they were in public. While Izuku did blush, for once he didn't refute the teasing Eijiro gave him about being Itsuka's boyfriend. Something which seemed to make Itsuka a lot happier as well apparently. It helped that Eijiro was giving Izuku a thumbs up in congratulations whenever Itsuka wasn't looking. Eventually, the three teens went their separate ways. Izuku and Itsuka had to return to Ichinomiya while Kirishima had a long train ride back to Shizuoka. All three felt that whatever the future held, they were ready to face the practical exam. The morning of the UA entrance exam was one like any other to Izuku Midoriya. He woke up earlier than usual, just so he could have a run and clear his head for the upcoming exam. Thankfully, he was fortunate to have been allowed to stay with Eijiro, who was only a 20-minute drive away from the main UA campus where the exam would be occurring in Mustafu. He'd arrived the night before at a large apartment building and taken the elevator up to the top floor, the entirety of which had been a gift from Kirishima-san's job. The condo was spacious, large enough that besides his initial greeting with Eijiro's parents, he hadn't seen or heard them for the rest of the visit. Despite being given his room next to Eijiro, and being assured it would be his when he passed the exam so he didn't have to do the long commute from Ichinomiya every day for school, Izuku and Eijiro decided by silent agreement to sleep in Eijiro's room, bundling up a bunch of blankets and comforters onto the floor instead of taking up any space on the bed. They had tried to get Itsuka an invite as well, but she had assured them she'd be staying with an aunt. Besides, it wasn't proper for a girl her age to be sleeping over with her boyfriend, a comment that had made Izuku blush furiously. They didn't stay up very late, they had an important exam the next day after all, but they still struggled to get any rest, nerves high for the exam. When Izuku returned to the Kirishima apartment, Eijiro was only just getting up. His brother had a sleepy expression on his face. It looked like he could take a few more minutes of sleep, but they had to start getting ready. After a quick shower in the guest bathroom, and changing into his Ichinomiya Middle School uniform, a black Gakurin with black slacks along with his favorite pair of red sneakers, he put his gym uniform into his backpack to dress later. They'd received an informational packet to come dressed in their school uniforms and that they would have time to switch over to a gym uniform to use for the exam. There was also a slip for any requested support equipment that they would think they would need to help them in the exam. Of course, the equipment was only allowed if it was needed for their quirk to work at 100% or if the applicant was quirkless. Thus, Izuku would be going into the exam without any support equipment, glad that he had the physical enhancement that his Byakugan's quirk energy provided. He'd done a lot of training with the quirk energy aspect of his quirk, working on controlling how much quirk energy he ejected from his tenketsu, and subsequently having come up with several applications. One application he called Juken, in which he focused on expelling only a specific amount of quirk energy into a target. Shinya-sensei had helpfully volunteered himself as a test dummy, letting Izuku test out different amounts of quirk energy injections to determine the optimal amount needed to shut down a quirk and disrupt the quirk pathway system. He'd waved off any injuries by claiming he knew a good doctor, which just made Izuku even more suspicious about his hero identity. Targeting Tenketsu around pressure points, it culminated in a quick fighting style, deadly, and could turn even a glancing blow into something to be feared. The pool of quirk energy Izuku had developed through his training of his quirk had also allowed him to enhance his body. By increasing the flow of quirk energy through his body, at the cost of increasing the strain on his eyes and muscles, he could move quicker and deal crippling blows. It made it easier to keep up with his Sharingan. He'd decided to call it Dojutsu, full cowling for the moment, likening the increased flow of quirk energy to donning a cowl. The only issue was that full cowling strain so far had a time limit based on how long he had used his quirk already. Izuku felt confident that he would be able to last through the practical exam before he started overusing his quirk. He was glad to see Kirishima-san already having beaten them to the kitchen, a large platter of traditional foods laid out on her kitchen table. The familiar scent of freshly steamed rice, the tangy punch of warm miso soup, and the familiar scent of freshly grilled fish were all some of the highlights on the table. Eijiro was only a few steps behind him as they entered the kitchen, eyes lighting up at the breakfast spread on the table. "Figured you boys could use the energy," Kirishima-san said, giving the boys a sharp grin. "Eat up and knock that practical out of the water." "Yes, ma'am," both teens declared, grabbing seats at the table before declaring a quick, "Itadakimasu." The food was delicious, and Izuku was glad that the fish was cooked to perfection. While he would always be partial to his mother's cooking, everyone from Ikinomiya knew their fish. Fish being the big business in the docks of that town meant you either learned how to cook your fish or moved somewhere else. Halfway through their breakfast, Kirishima-san headed out. She'd woken extra early to make sure the boy got a good breakfast into them, but work called for her as well. "Best of luck, boys," she called, as she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, already having taken part in her breakfast earlier. "Kick some ass." "Yeah, Mom, so manly," Eijiro shouted back, a happy grin on his face as his mom headed out. That grin stayed plastered on his face until they'd finished eating and washed up the dishes. Eventually, both of them were walking through Mustafu to the main UA campus. Izuku hadn't visited Mustafu in quite a while, and he took in the ward, his eyes flashing in realization when he remembered certain spots from his childhood. At one point he stopped walking and stared at a familiar park. The park was in full bloom, and looked serene, masking the history that had been made beneath the boughs of its trees with a mask of innocence. Izuku knew better, his teeth grit, fists clenching together. Eijiro, noticing that Izuku had suddenly come to a stop, turned to look at the dark look on Izuku's face. "Izu bro?" he asked, concerned over the look Izuku had on his face. It seemed to have hit a switch in Izuku, who turned and gave him a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh sorry bro, it's just that, this place. This is where my journey started," Izuku murmured, straying from the sidewalk and walking into the park with Kirishima walking after him, confused. "Your journey started in Rilo Park?" Eijiro asked, skepticism lacing his voice, still not having realized the significance of this park to Izuku. The park looked ordinary to Eijiro, remarkably well maintained considering how many big-shot villains wandered Mustafu trying to make a name for themselves in UA's backyard, typical playground equipment and benches, and a small grove of trees. Izuku walked over to an old-looking oak tree, still standing after so many years, and spent a few minutes looking from it to the swings, and then taking a few steps away until eventually he came to a stop. This was the spot. When I was 6, I came to spend some time on the swings after school. When arrived I noticed a kid getting bullied and tried to step in. Even though I was as good as quirkless back then, I wanted to be a hero so I stepped in. The kid took off, leaving me to the tender mercies of my former classmate, Bakugo Katsuki. Right here, he threw me to the ground and started beating me, kicking me with his legs and making liberal use of his explosion quirk. It was rough, but in the middle of it all, my quirk activated for the first time. Thanks to my Sharingan, I remember the experience vividly, Izuku muttered, grimacing as he remembered the pain of Bakugo's kick on his side. The crackle as an explosion went off on his back and shoulders. The singed skin and burns he'd left behind. Even with my quirk, I couldn't stop Bakugo back then. It's different now, Eijiro. I've worked so hard to reach this point, I'm not giving up. We're going to be heroes. Izuku said, turning to give Eijiro an intense stare, one Eijiro had never seen before. The intensity seemed to rouse something inside of Eijiro, who responded with a sharp grin, fist up for a quick fist pump that Izuku easily returned. Man Izu bro, that look you just gave me was so manly. Now, I'm pumped. Let's do this. Eijiro almost shouted, a grin plastered on his face, as he pulled on Izuku's sleeve and pulled him along until Izuku remembered he could walk. The two boys shared feral grins, as they took off at a jog towards the UA main campus. The streets of Mustafu soon began to become wider. The asphalt streets gave way to the UA main campus's cobbled brickwork, large archways standing tall over the path on the way to the auditorium where the first-year examination would take place. Izuku's gaze flicked around, before easily spotting the orange hair that signified Itsuka's presence. She was dressed in the navy blue Ikinomiya Middle School sailor uniform, and had an expression of anxiousness that clears up the moment she spots the two boys. There you two are. I was getting worried, you know. Itsuka huffed, annoyance evident as she grabbed the two boys by the ears and started hauling them toward the line for the first-year examinees. Ow hey Itsuka. Ow we can ow walk please let go, Izuku begged, noticing that Kirishima had simply hardened his ear to escape any of the repercussions that came with being dragged off the exam. That certainly wasn't very fair. Fine, but you better hurry, Itsuka said, feeling a bit sympathetic to her boyfriend's plight and stopping long enough to let him go, before continuing to speed walk ahead. Wah hey wait, how come you're still holding on to me? Eijiro exclaimed, disbelief etched into his voice as Itsuka continued to drag him away. You didn't say please. The whole interaction almost made Izuku burst out into a fit of laughter. He had to stop to constrain it, so he lost sight of the pair for a moment as the crowds were beginning to thicken. Just as he began to take a step, he felt something snag on his leg and he suddenly was falling. It was instinctual, his Sharingan flared to life and he quickly extended his hands forward to catch himself, going with his momentum and flipping his body forward in a front flip until he was back on two legs. It was an effortless flip that caught the attention of a few of the students around him. Some sent glares his way, others just scoffed like they could have done better. One person eeked, and they sounded rather close too. Izuku turned to see a pretty brunette with a plump face looking at him with stars in her eyes. Oh, that was so cool. I thought for sure you were going to fall, and I was going to catch you with my quirk but then you just front flipped out of the fall instead. Super sorry by the way, shouldn't have left my bag lying there. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Ochako Uraraka by the way, Uraraka said, waving her arms apologetically before doing a quick bow in greeting. Hey, don't worry about it. I'm partly at fault. I typically have a better sense of what's going on around me. If my sensei had seen that he'd have been chewing me out for days, Izuku said, scratching his neck awkwardly as he tried to wave off her apologies. It's nice to meet you as well Uraraka, I'm Izuku Midoriya. Good luck on the practical. Izuku received a quick, good luck, from Uraraka as well and was turning to leave when he heard a growl from behind him. A familiar voice, one he hadn't heard in years but that belonged to the person that had begun Izuku's change, for the better. Deku, came the grave, anger-filled voice of Katsuki Bakugo. The young man's voice seemed to almost fester with rage as he stared at Izuku, and it was all he could do not to blow up the damn loser like he had all those years ago. He smirked, seeing that one of Izuku's eyes was a milky white, like a blind man's. Quirkless and half-blind. Why is it always trash like you that think they can get in my way? Bakugo growled. There was a permanent stain on his record because of this Deku, easy enough to have been hand-waved away as he got older as some playground tussle gone out of hand, but it was still there, marring the otherwise perfection that was his youth. You're nothing but a quirkless loser on my path to the top Deku. Remember that, Bakugo said, a nasty grin coming over his face as he stared down Izuku, moving to pass the boy who up until now had maintained a carefully blank expression. Bakugo expected the nobody to move out of the way as he walked by but was surprised when he went to shoulder check him and he stood firm. You missed the memo P-brain. I was never quirkless, just a late bloomer. This late bloomer is going to destroy these exams, and you'll learn that the climb to the top won't be as easy as you think. Izuku spat, flaring his dojutsu to life, Sharingan flaring to life in his left eye and Byakugan pulsing to attention in his right. Bakugo looked confused before smirking and pushing past Izuku. TCH, so you can change the color of your eye. It's a pointless quirk, nothing beats mine, and I'll make it obvious in this exam. Worthless Deku, Bakugo growled to Midoriya, who only clenched his teeth in return. No, I'm not worthless. I'll prove it. As Izuku caught up to his friends, he couldn't help but notice how antsy they were looking. Itsuka in particular looked exasperated that it had taken him so long to catch up. Do I need to pull you along by the ear again? She threatened, causing Izuku to straighten up and shake his head furiously. No dear, he quickly replied. His cheeks glowed red as Itsuka gave him a quick peck on the cheek. Relax, I was just joking, Itsuka got out, a fond smile on her face as she took Izuku's hand. Izuku just gave a sheepish chuckle, while Eijiro guffawed at the quick turnaround by Itsuka. They quickly made their way through the registration line, Izuku steadfastly doing his best to ignore the glares shot his way by a certain angry Pomeranian. Thankfully, it seemed that neither Eijiro nor Itsuka had noticed any disturbance. As soon as they finished registration, they made their way over to their assigned seating. Izuku and Itsuka both got to sit next to each other, while Kirishima's seat was closer to the front. Bakugo's farther down as well. What a relief, Izuku thought, unsure if he'd be able to handle the angry blonde's furious stare at him during the practical exam's explanation. As they waited for more students to come into the auditorium and for the exam proctor to arrive, Itsuka and Izuku compared sheets. Huh, looks like we've been assigned different battle centers, Izuku noticed, his examinee number of 2534 coming before Itsuka's 2535. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Everyone in our row must come from schools in Chiba Prefecture, this way they can split us up during the exam to make sure we aren't working together, Itsuka replied, noticing with a pout that she had Battle Center C and Izuku had Battle Center B. Before they could continue, the lights for the stage sprang to life, revealing a tall, slim man with long blonde hair that was spiked upwards into a tuft behind his head. He looked like some type of punk rock star mixed with a biker, with his costume consisting of a black jacket with a tall collar, matching black pants, and knee-high boots. Itsuka and Izuku both locked eyes with big grins on their faces as they immediately recognized the radio personality for who he was. What's up UA candidates? Thanks for tuning into me, your school DJ. Come on and let me hear ya. The pro hero present mic shouted as he lifted his arms. The auditorium was mostly silent except for the duo's chorus of Itsuka and Izuku shouting back. We hear ya. This seemed to cause a few of the other examinees to snicker at them but had a noticeable effect causing a few examinees to relax. Alright, looks like not all of you listeners are asleep. Now, let's get straight to the main show. Let's talk about how this practical exam is gonna go down, okay? Are you ready? Present Mike shouted once again, trying to hype up the crowd. We hear ya, was shouted out once again by the duo. This time they were joined by a few other voices in the crowd, Eijiro being one of them. Yeah. Let's keep that energy bumpin', Present Mike said, lifting a fist now that the energy of the crowd seemed to be increasing. Now, as your application said, today you rockin' boys and girls will be out there conducting 10-minute mock battles in super hip urban settings. After I drop the mic here, you'll head to your specified battle centers. Sound good? We hear ya. Okay, let's check out your targets. There are 3 types of foe villains in every battle center. You'll earn points based on their level of difficulty, so better choose wisely. Your goal in this trial is to use your quirk to raise your score by shredding these foe villains like a mid-song guitar solo. But check it, make sure you're keeping this heroic. Attacking other examinees is a UA no-no, you dig? Present Mike explained a video played behind him on the presentation screen, showing the foe robots, their score, and the objective of the exam. It looked like he had more to explain but he was cut off by one of the students in the audience. The student was tall, with blue hair cropped on the shorter end, and had a stern demeanor, accentuated by a pair of rectangular glasses over a set of blue eyes. Excuse me sir, but I have a question, the boy said, arm shooting straight upwards almost robotically as he stood up from his seat. Hit me. On the printout, you've listed 4 types of villains, not 3. With all due respect, if this is an error on official UA materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. A mistake such as this won't do, the boy said, before turning on his seat to glare and point at the pair of Itsuka and Izuku. Additionally, you two hooligans. This is an exam, not a concert. You've tainted the examinees with your hooliganism. Act more maturely when in the halls of this prestigious academy. If you can't bother to take this exam seriously, then leave. You're distracting the rest of us. Izuku could have sworn he heard a snort coming down from where Bakugo was sitting. Itsuka made to get out of her seat and protest but was cut off when Present Mike butted in. All right. Examinee number 7111, thanks for calling in with your request, but examinees number 2534 and number 2535 are only helping hype out the crowd and relieve some tension. Now, back to your question. The 4th villain type is worth 0 points. That guy is just an obstacle we'll be throwing in your way. There's one in every battle center. Think of them as a hurdle you should try and avoid. It's not that it can't be beaten, but there's kinda no point. I recommend my listeners try to ignore and focus on the ones topping the charts. Present Mike said with a flourish, the screen behind him showing a video game replica of Present Mike fleeing from a big robot. Thank you very much, please continue, examinee number 7111 said, looking slightly flushed at the slight reprimand, not having realized that what he had mistaken for hooliganism had been 2 fellow students trying to relieve the tension in the room. That's all I've got for you today. I'll sign off with a little present, a sample of our school motto. As General Napoleon Bonaparte once laid down, a true hero is one who overcomes life's misfortunes. MMMHMM. Now that's a tasty soundbite. Y'all ready to go beyond? Let's hear a plus ultra. Plus ultra. Itsuka and Izuku called out, glad to see the little hype train they had been building wasn't entirely brought to a stop by the interruption from examinee number 7111. The following minutes were chaotic. Students were directed towards changing rooms, where they were assigned a locker corresponding to their examinee number and asked to change into their gym clothes. The changing rooms were divided by gender, but it certainly didn't stop more than a few guys that Izuku had to change alongside to comment about some of the girls they'd already seen. One of the guys tried talking about Itsuka and Izuku quickly shut that down. Hey, she's taken, Izuku almost growled. The other guy took one look at Izuku and balked. While Izuku would never have a bulky build, like that of All Might, his body was toned and muscular from years of practicing martial arts, the strain of manipulating the quirk energy inside of himself, and pushing himself to keep up with his senseis. The guy's quirk must have done something to his height because he didn't compare to Izuku, being almost tall enough to reach his waist, with plumpness that came from a sedentary lifestyle, and weird growths coming out of his head. The short boy quickly backed down, although he kept shooting Izuku envious looks as they changed. Once Izuku was changed into his dark green workout clothes, he lined up with the other examines heading to Battle Center B, surprised to see the blue-haired kid who had interrupted him also heading to this location, along with the short brunette he'd bumped into on the way into the auditorium. They were assigned seating, and Izuku ended up seated next to a guy with wild purple hair and bags under his eyes. It honestly looked like he hadn't slept in a while, but he seemed nervous. Not wanting to be rude, Izuku gave a quick bow in greeting before sitting down next to the guy. Hello. Nice to meet you. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Let's work hard and pass. Izuku exclaimed in greeting. The purple-haired guy looked at Izuku strangely, before ducking his head in a half-bow in greeting, unable to stand within the confines of the bus seating. The name's Hitoshi Shinso. So, you think you can pass? He asked, a critical look in his eyes as he looked Izuku over at a glance. Yeah, it'll be tough, but I'll shoot for the top spot in the exam. I need to knock someone down a peg, and I'll only do it if I prove I'm better than him, Izuku said with a quick nod, noticing they were now moving through UA's large campus. You've probably got a powerful quirk if you're planning for the top spot, Shinso replied, a scowl growing over his features. Maybe. But it's not about the strength of the quirk, it's how it's used. Controlling cloth fibers doesn't sound too impressive, but Best Jeanist took a quirk people would consider mediocre and used it to become Japan's 4th best hero. What's your quirk if you don't mind me asking? Izuku asked. Shinso gave Izuku a hard look and for a moment, Izuku thought he'd offended him. Then a defeated expression came over his features. It's called brainwash. I can control people who answer my questions, Shinso muttered, watching as Izuku tensed beside him with an annoyed look. That's so cool. That's an awesome quirk. With that, you could become a hero. Hostage situations could be dealt with super easily and you could help evacuate panicking civilians. Interrogating villains would be easy since you get them to tell you everything they're planning. Honestly, underground hero work might be best for you. If you stick to the spotlight, villains will eventually recognize you and they'll know how to get around your quirk. Need to work on bulking up a bit. You look kind of skinny, so some type of martial arts to complement your quirk so you can still defend yourself in a fight? Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe some type of voice modulator so you can confuse villains into thinking they're talking to someone else. Dang. I wish I had my notebook, Izuku muttered, not noticing that Shinso was looking at him with a flummoxed expression on his face. Shinso had gone his whole life hearing that his quirk was scary and villainous, and here was someone telling him he could be a hero, affirming his dream. If they weren't in such a public space, he'd have started crying. Instead, he gave the still muttering Midoriya, who was now mentioning something about range-enhancing amplifiers, a smirk. Midoriya-san, Shinso said, cutting off Midoriya's mumble storm. Midoriya in turn gave a sheepish scratch of the head, having just realized he'd entered another mumble spree by accident. You're pretty cool, Shinso said before turning to look at the passing scenery of the road. Oh thanks? Midoriya replied, very confused by Shinso's attitude. It seemed the purple-haired teen wanted privacy. Thankfully the bus was starting to slow down. The gates to the battle center were closed and Izuku guessed it was now a waiting game to see how long before the gates opened. He disembarked with the other examinees, who all began waiting around and stretching, getting themselves ready for the exam. Izuku himself began to limber up, doing some stretches to get ready for the start of the exam. As he was finishing some calf stretches, he heard a clearing of the throat by his side and turned to see that the blue-haired teen had walked up to him while he was busy stretching. Worried about a possible confrontation, Izuku got up but was unprepared for the sudden deep bow the other student gave him. You there, I wanted to apologize for jumping to assumptions. I thought you were trying to distract us in the auditorium, and failed to realize that others might be nervous, the student quickly said. Please accept my humble apologies. I failed to take into account that some of our peers were not handling the pressure of the exam as diligently as others. It's all right. Apology accepted, Izuku quickly replied, before giving a quick bow. Best of luck in the exam. Yes. I am Tenya Iida. Best of luck yourself, Midoriya-san. Tenya quickly replied, before the two split off. As Izuku turned away from Iida, he noticed the girl who had tried to help him earlier before entering the auditorium. She seemed to be nervous but was doing her best to hype herself. He made his way over to wish her luck, but was cut off by the sudden cry of, "Start." The rest of the examinees were looking around stunned by the sudden declaration, but Izuku's body had tensed for half a second before he'd moved. The battle center doors had opened up and now Izuku was moving on instinct. The quirk energy is his body propelling him as he moves in the urban environment, Byakugan already scanning the urban setting for villain bots. By the time the rest of the examinees had started moving, he was halfway down the first block and leaving them quickly behind. The Byakugan was great at information gathering. It could see through the buildings and the surroundings, and with it Izuku was studying the internals of the robots, pleased by what he saw. The robots were designed to look as imposing as possible, but they were mass-produced as none of the materials were military-grade as far as he could tell. Even the weapons they used would at best leave nasty bruises. It seemed by the type of material used, these robots were meant to be broken and destroyed. His theory was quickly confirmed when he stumbled across his first robot, a one-pointer who had its weapons trained on him as he approached. Before it could get a clear lock on, Izuku struck out with an explosive use of Jukin, destroying the joint holding the arm cannon and shoulder together, followed by a roundhouse kick that sent it crashing into a two-pointer that was starting to advance. As the two robots crashed limply to the ground, Izuku used the commandeered arm cannon as a javelin, spiking it into a three-pointer that had just turned the corner. Its body went limp as it crashed into a wall. To others, Izuku hadn't even turned his head to look at the three-pointer. However, Izuku had seen the three-pointer coming for ages now thanks to his Byakugan. Noticing that one of the cannons was purposefully detachable on the three-pointer, Izuku quickly pulled it off the still corpse before continuing. Picking something up on his Byakugan, Izuku began to make his way over, watching through his Byakugan as that guy, Shinso, was trying to escape bombardment from a two-pointer that had him pinned down. He rounded the corner of the alley, bouncing between the walls of the building to boost himself over a fence in the way before coming crashing down on the two-pointer, crushing its head with a hard kick. "You good?" Izuku called out to Shinso, who came out of cover. "Yeah, thanks," Shinso said with a curt nod, blinking in surprise as Izuku tossed him the surprisingly light three-pointer weapon. "Here, pull the trigger and blast them," Izuku said, before bouncing away down the street, pointing down another side alley near Shinso. "Take that alley for 6 points." Shinso watched as Izuku sprinted down the street, towards some robots he could see in the distance. How does he know there are robots down this alley? Seeing as Izuku had been pretty honest so far, he hurried down the alley, surprised to find 3 pointers on the next street over. Aiming with the cannon, he aimed and fired on them. Shinso watched as the rubber bullets impacted hard enough to dent their light metal. 3 shots and he had taken down the 2 robots, their frames crumbling up. Shinso quickly got himself a new cannon and continued his search for points. Turning a corner, he came across a curvy brunette levitating 2 one-pointers. Too focused was she on bringing them down that she failed to notice a 2-pointer coming up behind her. Shinso quickly aimed and shot at it, crumpling up the steel. The girl turned, surprised by the noise, and shot Shinso a grateful smile when she noticed how close the 2-pointer had gotten. A crash from further down the street stole both of their attention. Turning, they saw multiple explosions going on as Midoriya had seemingly hotwired himself a robot and was now piloting it to great efficiency, destroying several 3-pointers in a row before running out of ammo and crashing his robot into a 2-pointer. Izuku was panting, sweat dripping down his neck. He'd needed a break after taking down a set of 2-pointers earlier and had decided to hotwire a 3-pointer, using his Byakugan to determine which wires were best manipulated, before breaking the maintenance panel and piloting a 3-pointer. It was more trial and error than it looked, his Sharingan allowing him to make point, precise corrections when it seemed he'd messed with the wrong wire. Soon the maintenance panel had started to smoke and he'd had the robot crash into a 2-pointer. It had netted him quite a few points, and Izuku was proud to say he was at 41 points. A respectable score, but if he wanted to compete with Bakugo he had to keep pushing. His Byakugan let him know there were a few 1-pointers nearby and hurried to take them out, using Juken on the first one to shut down its joints. Ripping the shield off one of the 1-pointers, he used it to deflect a salvo of rubber bullets that he quickly rolled to advance under. A leg sweep sent the offending 1-pointer to the floor, where Izuku ripped its minigun off, using it to fire at the heads of 2 nearby 2-pointers. 48. Izuku went to advance on another set of robots when the ground began to shake. Focusing on the disturbance, his Byakugan spotted a huge robot emerging from the ground. The 0-pointer. That thing is huge. They weren't kidding when they said it was just an obstacle to run from. A few of the other contestants were fleeing from the huge 0-pointer, which was rumbling around menacingly, destroying buildings and being a general nuisance on the battlefield as it advanced, albeit at a slow pace. Izuku was about to turn and follow when he noticed a quirk energy signature trapped beneath some rumble in the path of the 0-pointer. It's that girl, Uraraka. She's trapped. Looks like her ankle is broken too. Damn, I've got to help. Using full cowling to give himself a boost of speed, Izuku sped towards the robot, against the flow of the crowd. His limbs strained from the use of so much full cowling, but he pushed himself forward, past a confused Ida and Shinso, who were watching him with wide eyes. Uraraka-san, I'm here to help. Try not to move your ankle, it's looking pretty broken. If I lift the rubble, will you be able to crawl out? Izuku asked, not waiting for a response as he started to lift the large block of rubble off of her leg. She gave a small cry in response but started to crawl right away as soon as she could move out. Thanks, she said, wincing as she tried to stand but failed. Once Izuku was sure she was clear, he helped her to her feet, putting one of her arms around his shoulders to keep her stable. Unfortunately, in the time it had taken to reach Uraraka, the 0-pointer had only gotten closer. Just as it seemed like it would trample over them both, it started getting shot by a barrage of bullets from the side. Izuku smiled as he spotted who was providing the covering fire. Shinso had acquired 2 of the miniguns off the one-pointers and was letting loose a barrage of bullets. "Come on, move, while it's distracted," Izuku said, guiding Uraraka out of the immediate path of the zero-pointer. They broke the line of sight behind a building, but the stampede of the zero-pointer had yet to finish. "If things continue, someone else could get hurt. We need to take down the zero-pointer." "Uraraka, your quirk, what's it exactly?" he asked, quickly to the panting Uraraka, who was in the process of catching her breath. He'd seen her make things float. Was it a form of telekinesis? Spotting a nearby car, an idea sprang into Izuku's mind. "I remove the gravity of anything I touch," Uraraka said, panting between words. Izuku noticed that Shinso was moving positions as the zero-pointer had started to approach his position. "All right, on my count, I need you to remove the gravity from this car," he said, turning his attention to Shinso, who was being weighed down by the guns and was having trouble escaping. "Shinso, covering fire," he shouted. The only response Izuku received was the spinning of the barrels as the miniguns started relentlessly pounding the giant robot with bullets. Now, Uraraka touched the car, a nauseating expression coming over her face the moment she did. Izuku didn't waste half a second, throwing the weightless car towards the maintenance hatch, remembering how damaging the wires on the 3-pointers had led to them eventually exploding. "Take cover." Shinso immediately dropped into a side alley, while Uraraka watched the car and waited until the last possible moment before restoring its gravity. With a heavy crash, the zero-pointer was pushed up against a building, before an explosion on its maintenance hatch brought it to a shuddering stop. "We did it," Uraraka cried out, relieved, before her face turned purple and she quickly turned away, vomiting the contents of her stomach all over the floor. Izuku gave a grin, relief that they'd survived the zero-pointer evident on his expression. "Shinso, you alive over there?" Izuku called out. "Barely," was the responding groan, as Shino came stumbling out of the alley, waving away some of the smoke. Izuku was about to recommend they continue the exam when a buzzer went off, announcing the end of the UA practical exam. While students fought hard to earn their places at UA, others watched on, keeping track of their progress over numerous sets of monitors. One such observer was a scraggly-looking man with long black hair, a scruffy beard, and bloodshot eyes. Half his face was hidden among a set of loose bandages that wrapped around his upper torso like a scarf. Yellow goggles sat nestled around his neck, and to the unaware observer, he looked to be very asleep. However, Shota Aizawa was likely more aware of the monitors than anyone else in the room and perhaps the principal. There were plenty of examinees, plenty with showy quirks that would certainly have earned them a spot at other, less prestigious hero schools. But this was UA, and UA only accepted the best. Currently, he was giving a dismissive look at a monitor featuring a blonde, spiky-haired teen wielding an explosion quirk with wild abandon against the robots. Not a care for the property damage, evident when he destroyed the front glass of a building as he handled a set of 2-pointers. So aggressive. Is this truly the type of hero you want to be, Katsuki Bakugo? Oh sure, the kid was racking up a high villain score, but there was more to hero work than just blowing up villains. Excessive force on some villains could net hero hopefuls into quite a bit of trouble. He'd likely get in, but the kid was an obvious problem child. No way was he ending up in Aizawa's class. Vlad could have him, he'd argue with Nezu about it. The kid had a disciplinary record. Excessive quirk use on a classmate during a little playground roughhousing had resulted in the other boy receiving quite a few bruises and burns. He highly doubted it was just a little playground roughhousing. He'd interviewed Aldera Junior High's faculty after Bakugo had passed the written exam to see if they'd noticed any strange behaviors about the boy. Aggressive tendencies or bullying behavior were the main things he was looking for. The faculty had all given him stellar responses. For all intents and purposes the boy was an angel in their eyes. He highly doubted such things. No matter how perfect his junior high record had been, the brute savagely attacking the robots with no care for his peers was evidence enough of that. It was apparent that his other faculty members didn't share the same concerns Aizawa had about the boy. They were praising his actions, but he could spot the frown Nezu was giving the screen he was featured on. The frown switched to a grin as Nezu noticed Aizawa watching him, and the little rat immediately began to type furiously at his console, apparently preferring a private conversation in the presence of other teachers. Nezu. Impressive, isn't he? Aizawa sighed, knowing he would only get pestered more by the principal if he didn't respond. Aizawa. No, Nezu. Oh, but I hadn't even asked yet. Aizawa. Give him to Vlad. Nezu. Oh phooey, who else to constrain him but you and your erasure? Aizawa. Vlad's hemokinesis can work just as fine in keeping him in line. Nezu. Sure, Nezu. Should I give Monitor 10, Battle Center B to Vlad as well? Aizawa focused on the screens, watching as a plain kid bounced over an alley to attack one of the villain robots and save another examinee. Giving him a weapon that he'd taken off a previous robot and pointing him in the direction of some more robots that he could have easily gone for as well. Aizawa updated that applicants' rescue points, noticing a few others had already made their own sets of recommendations on how much that applicant should receive before he responded to Nezu's message. Aizawa. Strength-enhancing quirks are a dime a dozen, easy enough for Vlad to handle. Nezu. Are you sure it's a strength enhancement quirk? Attachment. Aizawa frowned, viewing the applicant's profile a bit more in depth. There was some information that he wasn't sure he was even allowed to have access to, and he shot the rat a glare, who gave no visible signs of having noticed the glare. Still, seeing as he had the information, might as well read it. This wasn't the only recording of the exams they'd have to sit through. Each student's score had to be properly counted after all. It was easy to miss points and rescues on a first-time watch. Carefully, he gave the application a read-through, one eyebrow shooting up at the name on the file. Izuku Midoriya. He quickly pulled up Katsuki Bakugo's disciplinary file, highlighted the relevant incident, and sent it to Nezu, before continuing to read. If Aizawa was already suspecting something, he knew the principal would be able to figure out the full story much more quickly. After that, Aizawa continued through Midoriya's application. Most of the information was irrelevant, although the kid did have a glowing recommendation from Kamihara Ninjutsu Academy. Interesting, that Kamihara. Wonder why he didn't recommend the student then. Finally, he got to what Nezu had hinted at. Quirk. Dojutsu, Byakugan and Sharingan. It took a few moments for Aizawa to reassess the applicant up on the monitors with the information he was reading about his quirk. The report had helpful submissions from quirk therapists. The first report was standard for new quirks. The only problem was that this quirk first manifested at the age of 6. Later than the usual 4, so the kid must have been a late bloomer. The report gave some simple information about the quirk. It was ocular-based, with each of his eyes having different abilities. It was also a new mutation-type quirk. Both eyes could activate, but only his right eye remained permanently changed. His left eye reverted to his original eye color. His left eye gave him enhanced reflexes and perception, and allowed him to copy abilities at the level of muscle memory. His right eye gave him 360 degrees of vision, allowing him to see in every direction, and even had X-ray properties, allowing him to see through objects or into the human body. The vision was also telescopic. As long as it was within range, he could see it. Most people only had one quirk therapist evaluation on their files. Midoriya was an exception. At the age of 12, he had undergone a quirk awakening, with the catalyst being heightened emotions from stress as the only contributing factor. There was a note there from the doctor that suggested that Midoriya's quirk was capable of multiple quirk awakenings, which would unlock further abilities. After the quirk awakening, Midoriya's perception with his left eye had advanced significantly, while his right eye allowed the manipulation of his internal quirk pathway system to enhance both his body, even being able to expel the quirk energy from his system to affect other quirk pathway systems, potentially blocking off access to someone's quirk. An erasure-type ability with the perks of being able to back it up by enhancing his own body. Interesting. Aizawa quickly turned back to the monitors, watching the kid working with 2 other applicants to fight the zero-pointer of all things. He watched as they used the girl's quirk to throw a car at the zero-pointer, causing it to hit a critical location. The resulting explosion was brilliant, and Aizawa couldn't help but smirk. As the zero-pointer had been on an attack path towards the rest of the examinees, it would likely net the 3 huge amounts of points. Taking down the zero-pointer had a hidden score of 60 rescue points for saving the city and any fleeing examinees. Since the three of them worked together, they each took a part of the score. 20 rescue points each for them, combined with the earlier 10 points meant the kid had a respectable amount of rescue points. Turning back to his pad, he noticed the principal had sent him a reply. Nezu. Interesting. Nezu. I'll spend some time looking into this. Nezu. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Aizawa. I want Midoriya in my class. Nezu. Ho ho. Aizawa. Stop that, it's been 2 months since Christmas. Nezu. It's always Christmas, Aizawa. Haven't I just given you an interesting gift? Surely you'll have a lot of fun with that young hero. Aizawa. Nezu. Agree with me or you get Bakugo. Aizawa. Thank you Principal Nezu, you have truly worked to ensure I get only the least disturbing of examinees in my class. Nezu. I'm glad you think so Aizawa. Laughing face, laughing face, laughing face, you're getting him anyway. Aizawa. Who showed you how to use emojis, underscore? Nezu. Who says I haven't known how to use them this whole time Aizawa? Truly, you've disappointed me today. Aizawa couldn't help but let out a sigh of strangled annoyance, turning his attention back to the computer monitors. The monitors were still rolling, despite the exam having finished. Midoriya and that purple-haired examinee were all grouped around the brunette girl, who appeared to have hurt her ankle. Likely from all that debris that fell on her during the Zero-Pointer's initial attack. She should have been able to escape using her quirk, but the awkward position she'd been in hadn't given her enough space to move to hands and activate her quirk. It seemed Chio was already taking care of the issue. The youthful heroine was already at work, using her quirk to heal the applicant's leg easily enough. Looking at their newest, esteemed, faculty member, Aizawa couldn't help but scoff at the ridiculousness that was All Might. The man had been given special consideration due to the fact he was both a respected alumni and a good hero, but Aizawa doubted his teaching abilities. Aizawa had taken the time to pursue higher education in teaching, however unorthodox his methods were, as was the case with the rest of UA's staff. It wasn't rational that All Might was allowed to teach heroics when the man didn't even have a teaching license. He suspected there was a plot afoot between Nezu and All Might and more than just a simple change in his career path in the twilight years of All Might's career. Turning back to the monitors, he noticed that they were starting to show reruns of the exam, and he returned to paying attention to the other monitors. While the students were done with their parts, the teachers now had to grade the exam properly, which meant more viewing of the monitors. A single view wasn't enough in Aizawa's opinion. Nezu was fascinated by the information that Aizawa had sent him. He'd already analyzed all the prospective hero applicants during the first showing and was now taking his time to read through the packet of information he'd been sent on one Bakugo Katsuki. There was a stain on the young boy's record from a playground scuffle gone out of hand, or at least, that was what the authorities had proposed. It wasn't too difficult for the world's smartest being to hack into hospital servers and track down Midoriya's medical file from that time. Second-degree burns and bruised ribs sound like the boy survived a fall from a burning building, not a playground brawl, Nezu easily analyzed, before delving further into this grand conspiracy that had fallen into his lap. The mother, Bakugo Mitsuki, formerly Rei Mitsuki. Oh, and would you look at that, she was part of an extremist group spouting Meta-Liberation Army ideals during her time in university. Interesting, I wonder just how deep this goes, Nezu thought, his fingertips a blur over his console as a manic grin began to appear on his face. Connections between Mitsuki and the superintendent of Alderan School District were quickly found, along with school policies that encouraged MLA doctrine to be followed by their teachers. Promote the strong, and belittle the weak. Keep the records of students who show promise as clean as possible. My oh my, how exciting. A conspiracy within his prefecture. Practically in UA's backyard. Already Nezu was seeing opportunities to pull out his wrecking ball. It would be so fun. Needless to say, Nezu's manic grin remained on his face for the rest of that day, unsettling the rest of his colleagues, especially Aizawa, who was starting to regret ever sending that packet of information to Nezu. The following week was nerve-wracking for the three teens. While they'd put in many hours studying and felt like they'd all put in a good show for the practical exam, it didn't mean they were immune to post-test jitters about whether they'd passed or failed. Izuku and Eijiro were able to talk over the phone frequently, while Itsuka and Izuku met up every day during and after school to talk about the exam. To burn off the nervous energy, Itsuka and Izuku would often find themselves sparring with each other, quirks not included. It helped keep the coolness of early March away and kept them in shape now that they weren't wrapped up in their dojo activities. They both spent a lot of time working out. After one such session of sparring, they ended up side by side, sitting by the base of a tree as they leaned against each other. Their bodies were sweaty and they panted to regain their breath from the intense workout. Izuku didn't think relationships were supposed to be like this, but Itsuka insisted neither hold back during a spar. Although he could tell something had been up with that last round of sparring. The fact her blocks had gotten sloppy and her technique was starting to slip was evident enough. Itsuka's mind wasn't fully into the spar, and so she missed a hard hooked kick that sent her to the ground. As she tried to catch her breath, Izuku held out his hand so she could get back on her feet. "All right, come on, water break," Izuku said cheerfully, pulling Itsuka to her feet as they walked over to their bags nestled in the shade of a peach tree. The early spring weather meant that the tree was in full bloom and it provided a nice shade to escape the heat of the sun. While the weather was cool, they had built up a sweat doing all that training. Izuku grabbed his water from a pack, taking a big gulp, before swallowing and letting out a sigh of relief as the coolness seeped into his bones. He sat at the base of the tree, closing his eyes for a moment and leaning back against the bark, as he tried to let his body calm after the spar. He felt Itsuka sit next to him, her head resting on his shoulder as they sat there in silence for a few moments before Itsuka broke the silence. "Sorry, I should have been paying more attention during the spar," she admitted, voice tinged in bitterness that Izuku hadn't expected to hear. "It's all right. I should have called it when I noticed how off your game you were," Izuku replied, opening his eyes to look down at Itsuka, a teasing grin on his face. Itsuka pouted in response, looking like she was about to argue before her features changed to be more melancholic and she gave a resigned sigh. "I know, it's just. The wait for these results is killing me," Itsuka replied in exasperation, flopping her head onto his lap, "like I know I did good. That written exam was a piece of cake and I felt like I took out enough robots. I know I'm being silly but I can't help but worry the longer the wait goes." Itsuka had her eyes closed as she spoke, and Izuku took advantage of the fact to run his fingers through her orange hair, something that always seemed to calm Itsuka down before. "You're going to do fine. We've trained hard to get into UA and the proctors of the exam must have seen how great you were." "I'm sure of it," Izuku said, voice soft as Itsuka opened her eyes and stared at Izuku, momentarily caught off guard by the adoration on Izuku's face, a look that made her blush. "We're going to be heroes, Itsuka," Izuku promised, giving Itsuka a confident smile. Itsuka looked up into Izuku's eyes and felt her worry melt away, replaced by a strange feeling in her gut. The same feeling she felt whenever she was around him. Her eyebrows knitted together for a moment before a hungry look appeared in Itsuka's eyes that surprised Izuku for half a second before he was suddenly pushed up against the tree. Itsuka had reached up and was kissing him hard and desperately. Izuku groaned into the kiss and complied and kissed back, gripping her hips and rubbing her thighs as their tongues battled for dominance. The appreciative moan that Itsuka gave him must have meant he was doing something right. This was the first time they had gotten so physically intimate, their kisses from before being much more tame. Itsuka gripped his hair almost painfully for a moment, before they broke apart, taking in deep breaths. The soft embrace of wind on his skin made Izuku remember just where they were. While their location was remote, it would still seem improper if caught in such a compromising position. "Itsuka, we should." The crash of lips on his stopped any further words as Itsuka's hands went from gripping his hair to pushing down the front of his shirt. Izuku wasn't as bulky as Eijiro, but the years of training meant he was physically fit. The rippling muscles beneath the shirt were evidence enough. Itsuka seemed to agree as she let out an appreciative hum as her tongue battled for dominance with Izuku's. They continued roaming downward, and Izuku became painfully aware of just how constraining his shorts were at that moment. At the same time, there was a bit of worry tinged in there as they hadn't quite done something like this before. Itsuka seemed to realize this as well as she broke her kiss, her hands now resting beneath his shirt. Her eyes bored into Izuku's own as if asking permission to continue, an undeniable hunger in them that Izuku was sure was reflected in his own eyes. This sudden strike of passion had emerged out of nowhere for the both of them it seemed, and now the two were unsure of how to proceed. "Itsuka, We should stop. This place, we should do this somewhere special, right? Izuku asked, although hesitantly. Itsuka seemed to ponder the question, the haze of lust in her gaze softening a touch. No, you'd better go all out, Izuku. Especially for the full experience, Itsuka said with a grin before Izuku shuddered as she gripped him through the shorts. A devious smile on her face. That being said, playing with the equipment should be fine, right? Itsuka asked, her brow raised as she softly stroked him through the fabric of the shorts. Izuku responded by hungrily kissing her, seemingly startling her for a few moments before she returned the favor. It was a good morning to be Izuku Midoriya. The following morning, Izuku couldn't help but wake up with a grin. Yesterday's activities were still fresh in his mind. It earmarked a new stage in their relationship, one that the both of them had come away quite pleased with. He spent most of the day doing some ethical hacking. It helped by giving him a part-time job to do while helping out the companies that had hired him and making them more secure. As he was stretching his limbs after a couple of hours of work, his mother knocked on the door, a shocked expression on her face. Izuku, it's here, she practically yelled, vibrating with excitement as she handed him a thick envelope. Izuku stared at the envelope with a start, looking from it to his mom and then back again. A part of him wanted to use his Byakugan and see the results right away, but he held himself back. Should I go? Inko asked, getting ready to close the screen door to give her son some privacy. She was surprised when Izuku grabbed her hand to keep her from leaving. No, please stay. You were the first person to tell me I could be a hero when everyone else told me it wasn't possible. You kept me safe when the environment around me wanted to stifle me. You enrolled me in the classes and always pushed me to succeed. I deserve to be here for this just as much as I do, Izuku said, his gaze adamant. Inko's eyes welled with tears and she hugged her son tightly. Izuku returned the hug for a moment before pulling away and leading the way to the living room. Sitting on a stool around a small tea table, he looked at his mother one last time before they both nodded and Izuku ripped the envelope open. The most obvious material inside the letter, besides the numerous pages of paper, was a small black holodisk, which began blinking the moment Izuku glanced at it. Placing it on the table, the holodisk blinked once then turned on to reveal. Is that All Might? Izuku exclaimed, surprised that All Might of all heroes was the one that would be giving him his results. Why yes, I am here, as a projection, the hero said, giving a heroic pose, which likely would have been cooler looking in his hero costume instead of the red business suit he had on. Either way, it was still quite a shock to both Inko and Izuku. Wow, I knew that All Might was an alumnus but I didn't know they had him do these, Izuku admitted, surprised at the effort UA put into their applicants. Now, young man, you've certainly put in an exceptional showing. Getting one of the highest scores on the written exam, but it's the practical where you shined. 48 villain points are certainly impressive, but what type of hero school would we be if taking down villains was the only basis for getting in? All Might questioned, as clips of Izuku's test came up, saving Shinso and then fighting the zero-pointer with Uraraka and Shinso while the rest of the applicants escaped. You see, rescue points were also a good portion of the exam, and you managed to earn 40 of them. 15 for ultimately awarded by the panel of judges for aiding Hitoshi Shinso and showing him how he could earn villain points, and 25 were awarded for distracting and defeating the zero-pointer, an action that reduced damage to the city and allowed some of the examinees to flee to safety. All Might continued as a ranking list of examinees came up, starting from the bottom where Shinso had managed to barely reach the top 20 before it scaled up quickly to the top applicant. This means, young Midoriya, that you are this year's top applicant for the hero course with 88 points on the practical. Welcome to your hero academia. All Might with a regal pose, before the holodisk went dark and Izuku found himself caught in a death grip by his mom, tears falling easily from her face. Cheers of joy. Izuku Midoriya was going to UA. The following weeks were a rush for the Midoriya household. Izuku had to get his student paperwork filled out, order and pick up his school uniform, and go shopping for school materials. Eventually, it was finalized with the Kirishima family that Izuku could have the spare guest room for his own use for the semester, being insistent that they wouldn't take payment for board, but Inko managed to wrangle in concessions for help with groceries. When Izuku next saw Eijiro, he was exiting from the train and had to do a double take. The straight black hair Eijiro once had was gone in favor of sharply defined, red-haired spikes. "Dude," Izuku cried out, a grin on his face as he pointed at Eijiro's hair, receiving a cheeky grin in response. "Manly?" Eijiro asked, quirking an eyebrow. "Definitely," Izuku replied. There was a moment of silence before both of them burst out laughing, a warmth settling in Izuku's gut over how easily their camaraderie came. As Eijiro helped Izuku with his bags, they began to walk in the direction of Eijiro's apartment. The two of them talked about the happenings in Mustafu. A few new heroes had their debut recently. Kamui Woods and MT Lady were the standouts. Kamui Woods seemed to have a wood transformation quirk, and he used it to good effect to bind villains and maneuver through the environment. Mount Lady had a gigantification quirk that, while limiting in nature, had picked up a lot of appeal from the male variety. Itsuka had looked at Izuku quite jealously when she'd caught him viewing a video of her taking down another giant villain in her debut. It was only the mumble storm of apologies and the latest of his quirk analysis notebooks filled pages about her quirk that had cooled her temper into a fond exasperation. They soon reached the Kirishima household, with Kirishima-san having prepared a celebratory dinner of Izuku's favorite dish, katsudon. After eating dinner, Izuku began unpacking his things in his new room. He no longer had the luxury of the traditional tatami mats that had made up his last home, having been given a more modern room of wooden flooring, a bed with a mattress, and furniture for his clothing had been prearranged. A reasonably sized desk was positioned near the side of the room, perfect for a laptop and some writing equipment for when he had to do homework. The room even had a television, a luxury reserved only for the living room of his old home. After packing away his clothes, Izuku sat on the desk, having put it aside while he got settled in. A text from Itsuka was the first thing he saw. "Itsuka. Hey, how was the move in?" Izuku quickly typed back a reply. Izuku. "Hey, sorry for the late reply. Just finished unpacking. How's your aunt?" It took a few minutes before getting a reply. Minutes Izuku spent getting his laptop on to see if there was any new hero news. An All Might sighting in Mustafu. Strange but no surprise. It was probably there as a result of the time spent filming those videos for UA. A few rumors going around about a hero killer in one of the surrounding wards. A scary thought if true. His phone buzzed, and he turned his attention back to it. "Itsuka. No prob. She's been great and accommodating. I'm glad she was fine with me moving in while I am attending school. Itsuka. Gonna catch some shut-eye early. See ya tomorrow." Izuku gave a similar reply back, before heading over to Eijiro's room, poking his head in now that the door was open. "Hey man, up at 5 for an early run?" he asked, a sly grin on his face, knowing that Eijiro didn't like waking nearly that early. The stupefied look on Eijiro's face confirmed his thoughts. "Nah man, have fun with that," Kirishima waved off, looking ready to head to bed himself. "Gotcha, I'll wake you when I get back then," Izuku said with a smirk before heading to bed himself. The two met up with Itsuka the next morning on their way into UA, the boys walking to the train station first to pick up Itsuka before heading towards the campus itself. Their ID cards had arrived in the mail along with their acceptance letter, and it worked as their security badge to let them into the campus. Students rushed around, talking easily with each other while taking in the sights of the campus. There was a general buzz of excitement from some obvious first years, while a few second and third years looked on in amusement at the younger students. A map of the campus and some guidance from one of the upper years, and they were guided in the direction of Class 1A. The first thing that stood out to the trio was the immense size of the door. "Whoa," was all Itsuka could say. The two boys could only nod, a contemplative look coming over Izuku's face. The door's so big. Perhaps to allow for those with gigantification quirks. Granted, most people with gigantification quirks have some semblance of control about how large they can be, so maybe it is more for people with mutant quirks that alter their base size. Some mutation quirks can permanently alter a person's size. That would make more sense then, he murmured, unknowingly missing a fond look of exasperation between Eijiro and Itsuka. In a practiced duet, they helpfully chimed in. "Izuku, you're mumbling." This brought Izuku's train of thought to a halt, and he blushed but gave his friends a thankful glance. "Sorry," he said, before taking a breath and moving to open the door, surprised that it seemed to automatically move aside as he went to enter. The room was large, with 20 desks arranged throughout the room. While the trio was a little bit early for class, it seemed like most of the desks were already filled. Unfortunately, for Izuku, the first one that he spotted was Bakugo, who was arguing with Tenya Iida about decorum of all things. "Take your feet off the desk this instant. It's the first day and you're already disrespecting this academy by scuffing up school property, you cretin," Iida said, looking positively aghast that someone would dare treat their desk with the respect Bakugo was showing, feet up high on it as he leaned back on his chair. A cocky smirk on his face, as if he was proud to have riled up Iida. "You're kidding me, right? Your old school put a stick up your ass," Bakugo replied, the smirk never leaving his face, until his attention shifted toward the open door. A murderous expression crossed over his face, and he straightened, standing quickly from his chair as he glared daggers at Izuku. It was a movement that caught the attention of the rest of the class, as the socializing within came to a sudden stop. "Damn it, Deku," he yelled, a murderous look coming over his face as he began to approach, being beaten to the door by the quicker Iida, who had disregarded Bakugo's ravings upon spotting Izuku as well. His steps were quick but with purpose. As Tenya approached Izuku to talk with him, Izuku didn't fail to miss that Itsuka and Eijiro had shared a look between the two of them and moved to intercept the fuming Bakugo. "Good morning. My name is Tenya Iida from Sume Private Academy," Iida said as he reached a hand out to shake, which Izuku quickly took, keeping his handshake firm but polite. "Good morning, Iida-san. Yes, we met at the entrance exam if I remember right." "Battle Center B, correct?" Izuku asked, already knowing the answer. The Sharingan made it hard to forget faces and places, and he distinctly remembered Iida being one of the examinees who had been attacking robots before the zero-pointer emerged. "That's correct," Iida said, straightening his posture and gaining a serious edge to his tone. "Midoriya-san, you realized there was something more to the practical exam, didn't you? You must be very perceptive. I again apologize for my outburst in the auditorium. It seems my opinion of you was highly incorrect." "There isn't much my eyes don't perceive," Izuku replied with a smile, before taking a serious posture of his own, seeing as Iida appeared to be more of the formal type, and apology accepted. "In truth, I had my suspicions about the exam being more than just villain points for a few weeks leading up to it. I'd done some research leading up, and all the sources online suggested the same exam was done every year, cross-referencing that with the last several years of UA alumni and their quirks. There were at least a few outliers in each class that I don't imagine could have passed a pure villain point exam. That led me to conclude there was something the proctors weren't telling us about in the information packets we received after the written exam. While I wasn't sure exactly that rescue points were what we were being graded on, collateral damage and ruthlessness were other aspects I theorized might have been a part of the exam. Collateral damage because heroes need to be aware of their surroundings when fighting villains, and ruthlessness because as heroes we need to be sure we don't go overboard and cripple a villain that we're fighting. It's our job to make sure villains face justice and the law, not put them down. And so, Izuku cut off his words as the door opened behind him, not realizing that he'd been rambling. Unknown to himself, most of the class had started to sweat drop about halfway through his explanation to Iida, except Iida, who was listening very attentively to every word that came out of Izuku's mouth. Izuku thought he heard Iida mutter should have prepared more, as he rubbed his chin with a contemplative expression on his face. He was pleasantly surprised to see Hitoshi Shinso and Ochako Uraraka entering the door, both of them blinking in surprise over the group that had gathered around the entrance. Uraraka's eyes lit up in recognition when she spotted Izuku, and quickly threw an arm around his shoulders and Shinso's as she happily declared, "All right, the zero-pointer slaying crew all made it," she exclaimed, a big grin on her face. Shinso and Izuku met eyes and gave each other knowing grins before they all froze, separated by a stern voice that came from the doorway. A caterpillar. No, a man was lying on the floor, enveloped in a yellow sleeping bag. His eyes were bloodshot and his beard scruffy, as if he didn't get enough sleep. And his tone of voice was serious. Worst of all were his words, which were serious and straight to the point. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can just leave." They were said with such apathy that it made everyone shut up and hold his breath. Even the explosive Bakugo had quieted down and gritted his teeth. choosing to listen to the man's words over continuing the argument that he had been having with Itsuka and Eijiro. For some reason, Izuku was sure the man gained an even more exhausted expression on his face when he saw Bakugo was in the classroom. "Welcome to UA Hero course," the man said. "Wait, was this their sensei?" Exclamation mark. Instead of continuing, he pulled the zipper on his sleeping bag down a bit and quickly gulped down a packet of apple sauce. Then, like some hideous moth emerging from its cocoon, he rose, sliding the zipper on the sleeping bag all the way down before pulling it away and standing out of it. He looked even more bedraggled without the sleeping bag, hair in a long wavy mess, a set of loose bandages wrapped around his neck, and a strangely black combat suit put on. This must be a hero then, Izuku mused, racking his memories on just who it could be. He had a pretty good idea, but until he saw the man's quirk in action he wouldn't know for sure. The hero he was thinking of liked to keep out of the public eye, as most underground heroes tended to do, and the only real reference he had was a staff photo from online that had his name, his actual name, not his hero name. "It took 8 seconds before you all shut up. That's not gonna work. Time is precious. Rational students would understand that," he said, looking incredibly worn out in Izuku's estimation. Was he doing hero work on the side with teaching? That could explain the exhausted expression he wore. "My name is Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher," he said gruffly, sounding almost annoyed at the prospect. A few students dropped their mouths open in surprise, clearly not anticipating such a scruffy man to be their teacher. "Right, let's get to it. Put these on and head outside," Aizawa said, reaching into his sleeping bag and pulling out the school's gym uniform, an action that caused everyone to fall into a pit of confusion. "Since time is precious, I'll give you 10 minutes to get changed. Any later and you'll be expelled." The blasé manner in which he spoke sent a shock of worry throughout the group. He seemed entirely too serious about such a claim. Izuku was already advancing forward, picking up a gym uniform his size before bowing to his sensei and departing toward the locker rooms. Aizawa gave the rest of the class a dead expression as if silently berating them with his annoyance for not following Izuku's example. It was an expression that had the rest of the class quickly following suit. A mad scramble ensued and many tried to get a uniform and rushed to the locker rooms. Izuku was the first out of the locker rooms, used to changing quickly and under pressure. Kamihara-sensei had ensured he knew how to be quick about changing his appearance when time was essential. The group of boys entering the locker room gave him confused expressions, wondering how he had beaten them to the locker room and gotten changed so quickly. Kursashima was among them, and only gave Izuku a grin. A grin that turned murderous as Bakugo stomped past Izuku, shoulder-checking him into the wall as he did so. He noticed Ida looked outraged at the action, but the hardened of Eijiro's fist let Izuku know he needed to de-escalate the situation now. "Don't bother, we'll show him later," he replied, voice serious as Eijiro met eyes with him a moment before giving a stiff nod. One thing was clear, it seemed Bakugo's petty little rivalry hadn't gone away, only festering over the years. Izuku wasn't that 6-year-old who had been pushed around. Bakugo was going to learn the hard way that he couldn't push Izuku around any longer. Heading onto the training grounds, he was surprised to find Aizawa already there, sure that the man would have still been handing out uniforms. He didn't strike Aizawa as someone particularly energetic. He looked half asleep standing in the training field, his eyes fixed on a stopwatch. His eyes flicked to Midoriya for a moment, before turning back to the stopwatch. Izuku was quickly being joined by the rest of the class, some of them looking to have run from the locker rooms. The moment the last student arrived, Aizawa hit the timer on the stopwatch. 8 minutes, 7 seconds. Cutting in close, Aizawa murmured, before turning to look at the group. "All right class, listen up. We're going to be having a quirk assessment test," he said, only to be responded by with a shocked exclamation from the class. "Quirk assessment test?" Most of the class shouted, with Uraraka's voice carrying last from the group. "But sensei, what about orientation?" she asked, looking concerned over missing the activity that Izuku was sure the rest of the classes on campus were attending. "If you really want to make the big leagues, you can't waste time on pointless ceremonies," Aizawa said, as he inspected the training facility to ensure they were usable before looking back at the students. "Here or UA were not tethered by traditions. That means that I get to run my classes however I see fit. An unease settled over the students as they remembered how easily their sensei had dropped the threat of expulsion from before. The fact his tone of voice was serious, and with an uncaring expression suggested that he wouldn't hesitate to expel them given the chance. You've been taking standardized tests most of your lives, but you've never been able to use your quirks before, Aizawa said, raising his phone for the class to see the events that were lined up for this quirk apprehension test. The country's still trying to pretend that we're all created equal by not letting those with the most power excel. It's not rational. One day, the Ministry of Education will learn. Aizawa turned and glanced at Izuku, looking a bit more serious than before. Midoriya, you managed to get the most points on the practical exam, Aizawa said, surprising Izuku out of his attentive listening stance, yet he still managed to hear Bakugo gnashing his teeth in frustration. What was your farthest distance throw with a softball in junior high? Izuku gave it a thought before responding. 64 meters maybe, Izuku replied, looking pensive. While the Sharingan helped with memory retention, he hadn't bothered to ever keep it active during the physical exams at school since quirk usage wasn't allowed. Aizawa gave a nod and tossed Izuku the ball, who easily caught it, before motioning towards the circle. Right, try doing it with your quirk. Anything goes so long as you stay in the circle, Aizawa said, as Izuku walked up to the circle, looking pensive for a few moments before activating his quirk. His Sharingan spun to life, and the veins alongside the right side of his veins bulged. He noticed that jaw muscles in Aizawa sensei's jaw clenched as if he was about to speak, seeing the muscle movements for the word, hurry, forming before the word escaped his sensei's mouth. He turned toward the field he needed to throw the ball towards, tossing the ball upwards in a smooth motion. As the ball began to make its descent, Izuku pushed quirk energy through his limbs into a full cowling, before landing a spinning sidekick into the ball. Sensei had said anything goes after all. That doesn't necessarily mean he had to toss with his hand, just his quirk. Closing his eyes to center himself after the kick, Izuku deactivated his quirk, surprised to hear the shout of surprise and praise from his classmates. All of you need to know your maximum capabilities. That's the most rational way to determine your potential as a pro hero, Aizawa said, lifting up his phone to the rest of the class, showing Izuku's score of 574.2 meters. While most of the class looked surprised, a furious expression appeared on Bakugo's face. Whoa, 574 meters, are you kidding me? Exclaimed one of the guys in class, his ruffled and blonde with a unique-looking black lightning bolt dyed in. Oh, that looks like fun. A girl with pink hair and horns cried out, looking excited at getting to take her turn next. Izuku flinched at the reply, noticing that Aizawa had tensed up at the response too. Before their sensei could respond, explosions went off as Bakugo launched himself from the class, a murderous expression on his face. Hey, Bakugo screamed, voice deadly with fury, tell me how someone with a lame quirk like yours managed to do that, or you're dead. Izuku quickly entered a martial arts stance, ready to counter Bakugo's attack and scolding himself for being lax enough to deactivate his quirk. However, just as Bakugo was about to reach Izuku, strange bandages wrapped around his forehead and waist, holding him still. The flickering explosions in Bakugo's hand suddenly go dead. The whole class turned to see a glaring Aizawa sensei, hair levitating up as he held Bakugo down with a simple ease. Suddenly, Izuku knew just who their sensei was. Eraserhead. Izuku gasped, his expression turning from battle ready to being filled with stars as he recalled just who this was, Japan's erasure hero. While Izuku had done a ton of research on heroes with erasure-type abilities, Eraserhead had been the one Izuku had done the most research on. It was well documented that he had the best erasure-type quirk around, with a simple glance being adequate enough to erase someone's quirk, but Eraserhead also took underground hero work seriously. Not many people knew his face. To think he was one of their teachers at UA. Bakugo looked startled that someone had managed to catch him, and tried to fight the restraints to no avail, barely managing to fight the pull of the scarf on him to turn his face to glare at his teacher. How is your damn scarf so strong? Bakugo growled as he continued to fight the pull of the scarf, succeeding in almost tangling himself up. Because it's a capture weapon made of carbon fiber and a special metal alloy. Stand down. The last two words were said with such serious hatred and annoyance that it almost startled Izuku and clearly startled Bakugo, who had probably never been disciplined by a teacher before based on the expression he wore. As for the rest of you, being a hero isn't all about fun and games. Some of may think testing out our quirks this way looks fun, but we've got 3 years to turn you into respectable heroes. There won't be any time for games, playtime, or any petty disturbances. Aizawa reeled in his capture scarf after that, causing Bakugo to stumble a bit as he was pulled back, making it clear just who he was talking about with that last set of words. Today, you'll compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last has none, and will be expelled immediately, Aizawa said with a smirk, as his hair returned to resting on his face. The class blanched. At the smirk Aizawa shot their way before he released a fuming Bakugo who was glaring daggers at Midoriya. Midoriya stared back, a defiant look in his eyes, as he walked past Bakugo to rejoin his friends. A spark of anger lit up inside him at the thought that Bakugo hadn't taken their last conversation seriously enough. His thoughts were also occupied by something else. Immediate expulsion. I'd heard rumors that a UA had a whole class expelled last year. Aizawa-sensei has to be the source behind those rumors with how easily he threatens expulsion, Izuku thought, rejoining a worried Itsuka and Eijiro. Both looked worried about the threat of expulsion. Don't worry, we'll all place high, Izuku said with a nod, almost as if demanding a promise out of the two of them with his words. They steeled their gazes and responded with pumped fists and a nod. Like I said, I get to decide how this class is run, understand? Aizawa said, looking around as he noticed more of the students put on a more serious appearance. If that's a problem, you can head home right now. However, not every student looked nearly as confident or serious as Izuku's trio of friends. Shinso had gotten paler if possible, hands shaking slightly with worry. Meanwhile, Uraraka had leapt from his side to confront their sensei. That's not very fair. You can't just send one of us home. I mean, we just got here and it's only the first day. She protested, not looking pleased about the sudden stakes or test the class was being presented with on the first day. Oh, and you think natural disasters are? Or power-hungry villains, How about catastrophic accidents that destroy entire cities? Aizawa asked, not giving the stunned Uraraka a chance to reply as his voice changed slight inflection from one of chiding a disrespectful student to one more in line with trying to teach a lesson. Not everything in the world is fair, and it's up to heroes to fight what makes the world unfair. You won't be taking it easy if you want to be a pro. Push yourself to the brink. For the next 3 years, UA will throw hardship after hardship at you, so you'll need to go beyond. Plus ultra style. Show me it's no mistake that you're here. It seemed that Aizawa's words had done the trick, as many students who might have been looking nervous were looking more confident. Even the drowsy Shinso had a determined expression on his face. Now, let's get started. Line up for the 50-meter dash, Aizawa said, returning to a more non-interested pose while the rest of the class started their warm-ups. Izuku patiently waited in line, watching as groups of 2 went up and did their sprints. Keeping track of the amazing quirks on display, Tenya Ida had an impressive score with his engine quirk, and Izuku couldn't help but wonder just how fast he could go at his top speed based on the results. Tsuyu Asui delivered an impressive score as well, using her frog legs to vault across the finishing line. Not nearly as impressive as Tenya, but the speed was nonetheless respectable. Itsuka ended up going next, racing against Uraraka. While Uraraka decided to go with a traditional starting vault, Itsuka decided to try something new, performing an awkward front flip vault with her hands for distance. It likely would have worked, but it was clear Itsuka hadn't practiced something like this before, since she didn't stick the landing. She managed to recover and score a decent 5.59 seconds. Izuku was up next after that race, and he had to stifle a groan to see that he was partnered up with Bakugo, who seemed pleased that he'd get to race against Izuku. Alright Deku, you're gonna eat my smoke, he grinned, turning towards the starting line, small explosions already popping from his palms. Izuku only scoffed, remembering that Bakugo thrived on verbal responses. It seemed he'd done the trick since Bakugo was already growling and turning to look at Izuku. Muddled up in his anger, he missed the starting countdown. Izuku, who had already activated his quirk, didn't. Using the Sharingan to help with increased reaction speed, he was ready to pass the starting line the moment the buzzer went off, and funneling the quirk energy through his body, he beat Bakugo to the finish by a meter. Only bothering to stand still and listen long enough for the time of 3.79 seconds to sound off before heading off to join Itsuka, not bothering to give Bakugo the light of day. The enraged scream of Bakugo brought him plenty of enjoyment. Eijiro put in a decent time of 5.22 seconds, running barefoot to give himself a better grip on the ground as he ran, easily outpacing Shinso, who had only managed 7.35 seconds. Afterward, they went inside one of the buildings to test their grip strength. Izuku was proud to have gotten 350.2 kilograms, higher again than Bakugo, whose quirk risked destroying the machine and wasn't very applicable. Eijiro also did well, with a score of 331.6 kilograms, but they both paled in comparison to Itsuka's 724.2 kilograms, which drew a lot of attention from everyone before a raven-haired girl in the corner made a compressor and almost broke her device, a feat that drew some shock exclamations from many members of the class. Bakugo ended up surpassing Izuku in the standing long jump, easily flying over the sand with the help of his explosions. He gave Izuku a fierce competitive glare, as if daring him to beat the score, but Izuku just took his jump, giving a nod when he earned a respectable 6.22-meter jump, before rejoining his friends. Much to the frustrations of Bakugo, who had been eager to gloat about his victory over Izuku but had once been ignored. For the 30 seconds of side steps, Izuku was able to put out a respectable score of 98, trailed closely behind by the pink-haired girl with the horns. Arriving back at the ball throw, Izuku sat back while others took their scores. Bakugo went all out with the ball and managed 705.2 meters, an impressive score. But his victorious smirk was quickly wiped off his face when the raven-haired girl spawned a cannon and sent the ball launching more than 1,000.0 meters. And a scowl took over his features when Uraraka literally threw the ball in space, earning her the moniker of Infinity Girl by most of the class. However, Izuku had to furrow his brows in concern when Shinso only managed to throw the ball 52 meters. As he turned to rejoin the class, Izuku could tell that Shinso was looking down and moved to talk with him. "Hey man, everything all right?" Izuku asked, a concerned tone in his voice as he walked up to Shinso, who was standing a bit away from the group while the rest of the class did their throws. "No, things aren't going good. This quirk apprehension test is meant for people with flashy quirks. I haven't even managed to get a decent score on any of the tests," Shinso admitted, clenching his jaw in frustration as Itsuka sent the ball over 800 meters in her throw. "I can't keep up with everyone." Izuku looked at Shinso for a few moments, before shaking his head. "Nah, you're wrong about that," he said, earning a shocked glare from Shinso. "You've just got to think things through. Remember what Aizawa-sensei said, anything goes for these tests. Put that to the test. For instance, for that last test, you could have stayed in the circle and brainwashed one of us to carry the ball out to a set distance for you. It would have met the requirements for the test since you were using your quirk." Shinso blinked hard at Izuku, wondering if he'd heard that correctly. "You would have wanted me to brainwash another student to pass the test?" Shinso asked, confused by Izuku's suggestion. "Why not? It's what I would have done. Had I to carry me across the 50-meter dash, or let myself be thrown across the sand pit by that dude who bulks up with sugar," Izuku explained. "You have an awesome quirk, and you'll need to use it to be a pro. Don't hold back for our sakes." Izuku gave Shinso a pat on the shoulder, before rejoining the class, who was moving on from the ball throw to prepare for the distance run. As Izuku began to limber up for the mile run, he paid close attention to Shinso. Shinso looked conflicted for a moment but seemed to steel himself and walked over to the raven-haired girl, asking her a question. She blinked in surprise and answered, her expression going immediately blank right after. Shinso seemed to ask her something and then she made him a bike. As he took his position on his bike and ended his quirk's effect on the girl, she seemed to blink in confusion and glanced over to the watching Aizawa, who gave her a nod that it had been allowed. Still confused, she made her own bike and readied herself on the track. It seemed like Shinso would do all right after all. "All right, time to give you your results," Aizawa said, looking incredibly bored while most of the class recovered around him, I've ranked you all from best to worst. You should probably all have a good idea of your standing already. Aizawa pressed one of the buttons on his phone, projecting the list up for the class to see. As the list sprang out to be projected in front of the class, Izuku looked at the top of the list. He'd come in second, behind Momo Yaoyorozu, which made sense. She was the one with the creation quirk, and had an item for every test ready to go, earning her a good score on practically everything. Even the tests she couldn't quite benefit from a creation were trivialized by her athletic ability. Shoto Todoroki came in third, having used the explosive capabilities of his ice generation to get some seriously impressive results. Bakugo had come in fourth, the gnashing of his teeth making it perfectly evident to Izuku that he couldn't stand such a notion. Tenya Ida had taken fifth, another strong student with a strong quirk that had used it creatively for good scores all around. Izuku searched further down the list, relieved to see Itsuka in eighth, trailing Mezzo Shoji by a bit, and Kirishima in ninth. Uraraka seemed happy with her 11th place score, but there was one last person in Izuku's group that wasn't, oh no. In the 20th spot was Hitoshi Shinso. The stiff and pale expression on Hitoshi's face suggested he'd seen his placement as well. Izuku moved to comfort his friend, but Aizawa-sensei's words caught him off guard. "And, I was lying. No one is going home," Aizawa said, causing all the students to stop and stare at their sensei. Shocked and flabbergasted expressions on each of their faces. That was just a rational deception to make sure you gave it your all on the test. The shit-eating grin on Aizawa's face right after he said it had the rest of the students exclaiming in shock. All except two: Izuku, who was looking at Aizawa suspiciously, and Yaoyorozu, who appeared to be very nonchalant about the whole thing. "I'm surprised the rest of you hadn't figured it out," she said, giving her classmates confused expressions. "That's a lie," Izuku said at the same time, garnering the attention of his classmates and the curious look of their sensei. "Sensei, am I wrong in stating that last year's 1A was all expelled by you?" Izuku asked, getting shocked gasps from those around him. Aizawa gave him a passive stare before he smirked. "All on the first day, yes," Aizawa said, causing the students to pale and Yaoyorozu to flinch. Caught off guard by his response, "I ran them through something similar on day one. They arrived late out of the changing rooms, goofed around during the tests, and didn't take them seriously. Even their last place looked like he'd just been having fun and not taking the exam seriously. In the end, I determined none of them had the potential to be heroes and had them moved out of the hero course to our general studies program, with a recommendation they not be allowed to regain their spots in the hero course through the sports festival." Aizawa's gaze hardened as it traveled across the class, landing on Yaoyorozu last. "Make no mistake, if any one of you had proven you didn't have the potential for hero work, you would have been moved to general studies without a second thought. Just because you've made it into the hero course, doesn't mean your spot is guaranteed in this class," Aizawa continued. "Every day of this class you'll need to prove to me why you deserve to be in the hero course over your peers in the business courses or general studies. Don't get lax just because you've managed to overcome a small jump in hurdle in comparison to those who didn't score high enough in the practical and needed to be seated out to general, business, or support." With a final glare across the class and a nod to Midoriya for catching him in the farce he'd had going, Aizawa lessened the slightly serious stance that he noticed had put a few of the students into fearful positions. "All right, we're done for the day. Change out of your PE clothes and head back to the classroom. You'll find your assigned seat and syllabus. See ya tomorrow," Aizawa said, giving the class a lazy wave before beginning to head back to the classroom himself. "Nice catch, bro," Eijiro said, giving Izuku a shoulder bump and grin. "Oh, thanks, but I likely would have missed it had I not been doing some research on UA faculty," Izuku said with a grin, scratching the back of his head, before sharpening his focus to look at Eijiro and Itsuka. "Nice job on your rankings, by the way. We're all in the top 10 of the class. Izu, you got second. Me and Kirishima are going to have to put in a ton of work if we don't want to end up eating dust from you," Itsuka said with an exasperating sigh, to which Izuku only sheepishly smiled, scratching the back of his head in slight embarrassment. "Yeah bro, we're gonna have to work out even harder to catch up. It's going to be a manly effort to catch up," Eijiro replied, punching his fist into his hand. "You and your manliness, Itsuka said with a fond roll of the eye, giving Izuku a kiss on the cheek, an action that didn't go unnoticed by their other classmates who had bothered to listen in. Meet you back at the classroom, babe. Gotta get out of this gym uniform before it starts to stink from the workout. Stink? You? Impossible, Izuku said with a snort, giving her a quick peck on the lips before they went their separate ways. As they turned, ready to head off to the separate changing rooms, they noticed that the immediate group of students was giving them funny expressions. Uraraka had a red blush on her face, Ida looked at them crossly, Shinso was giving Izuku a smirk, and Eijiro was giving him an exasperated shake of the head. Midoriya-san, Kendo-san. I know we've only just met, but please, remember to maintain decorum in public spaces, Ida said, his hands waving in a chopping motion. Oh my gosh, you two are so cute. Uraraka squealed, giving Itsuka a hug and chattering away with her as the orangutan gave a nervous laugh. Spill the goss. How long have you two been together? Oh, a few years now. Since our final year of elementary school, Itsuka said, a nervous blush on her face as she and Uraraka walked away. Oh, relax, Ida, a little kiss like that is hardly indecent, Shinso said with a smirk, causing Ida to gasp in shock. What? But propriety says they could have used tongue, Shinso said with a grin in Ida's direction, which made the taller boy come to a coughing stop, his face burning in embarrassment at such a notion. Ah, yes, apologies Midoriya, congratulations on such a fruitful relationship with Kendo-san, Ida said, giving Izuku a quick bow of apology and speeding away towards the locker room. Might as well take the band-aid off about our relationship now, Izuku said with a shrug at the questioning look Eijiro gave him. They were going to find out anyways. Hey, yeah, I guess you're right about that, Eijiro grinned, as they headed for the locker room. The trio was joined by two more on the walkout from school. Izuku and Eijiro had come to an unspoken agreement to walk Itsuka to the train station. Uraraka and Ida had joined up with them soon after. Shinso's house is in the opposite direction, was all Uraraka said as they started walking towards the train station. He must live close by then, Ida said with a contemplative nod. Yeah, Izu bro and I live close by too, Eijiro said with a nod. Huh, I noticed the three of you seem to use your first names often. Are you all close? Uraraka asked, looking at the trio curiously. Yep, I've known Eijiro longer than Itsuka, but we consider each other brothers. His parents were even kind enough to let me stay with them during the semester, Izuku admitted. And Izu and I started using first names when we started dating, Itsuka explained, leaning her shoulder on Izuku's playfully. By the way, all the girls were talking about how cute of a couple we are in the locker rooms. I would hope so, as is an ugly couple. Outrageous, Izuku replied with a smirk, earning a snort of laughter from the group and a kiss on the cheek for his humor by Itsuka. Their laughter was caught off as a familiar angry shout called out. Deku. Izuku sighed in annoyance and turned to regard Bakugo with an annoyed glare. What do you want? He said, voice biting out angrily. Why the hell were you ignoring me during the tests? Think you're better than me or something? Bakugo demanded to know, glaring as he noticed that Eijiro and Itsuka quickly moved into defensive positions behind Izuku. Think? Izuku asked, a questioning look coming over his face, before he shook his head, as if having made a decision. No, I know I'm better than you, Bakugo. What the hell did you say? Bakugo growled, his palms opening up and the sparks lighting up beneath them as he stared down Izuku. Since it seems to you can't run it through your head, I'll repeat myself. I am better than you, Izuku said, saying the word slowly so Bakugo could really understand what he was trying to say. The reason I didn't spare you a glance during the tests. You're so far beneath me that it wasn't worth the effort. Bakugo looked apoplectic, eyes wide in astonished fury that anyone, especially this, Deku could claim such a thing over him. It looked like a vein was about to pop in his skull from the rage he was feeling. This isn't elementary school, Bakugo. You're not the top dog here, and the teachers aren't going to care that you have an awesome quirk. All they see is a kid with a history of being a bully and the gall to think he can be a hero with the attitude you're carrying around, Izuku continued, before turning away from Bakugo, showing him that he didn't even fear a reprisal from the boy. You're beneath me, Bakugo, because I already know that you'll never be a hero higher rated than me, not while that chip on your shoulder exists, Izuku called over his shoulder, Itsuka and Eijiro glared at Bakugo until he huffed and started to walk away in a different direction. Once he was sure he was gone, they turned to meet the confused glances of Ida and Uraraka. What was that all about? Ida asked, looking between the annoyed-looking Izuku and the fuming Bakugo, who was now well out of earshot. Bakugo and Izuku have history, Kirishima explained, looking at Izuku as if asking permission. Izuku pondered for a few moments before speaking. I was a late bloomer, my quirk didn't come in until I was 6. A lot of late bloomers don't often develop quirks until much later in life, and Bakugo decided that I was as good as quirkless as a result. He went out of his way to torment me as a kid, encouraged others to help in the tormenting, and even went so far as to physically beat me down whenever he had the chance. Sometimes he would use his quirk, Izuku admitted. Eventually, after a really bad beating, Mom decided we should move away. We moved to Ichinomiya. It's where I met Eijiro. It's why we're so close. He was my first real friend. Is that why he calls you Deku? Ida asked, frowning in disappointment that a member of their class had been such a bully. Yeah, he said it's cause the kanji in my name kind of look like worthless. He's called me that since we were 4, Izuku admitted. Oh, but Deku kind of sounds like Dekiru, you know? Uraraka chimed in, trying to brighten up the mood, earning her a smile from the trio. Makes me think, you can do it, when I hear Deku. Yeah, I think Itsuka said the same thing when we told her about Bakugo, Izuku said with a grin. Pretty sure I did, yeah, Itsuka said with a chuckle, before checking the time. Shoot, we'll have to run if I want to catch my train. Seems Bakugo took up a bunch of our time without even realizing it, Itsuka said. Uraraka freaked out a bit at that. Yeah, I think we're catching the same train too. We'd better hurry, she said, taking off at a run, Itsuka and the boys hard on her heels. Principal Nezu was taking his time going through some of the files he had taken a look through. All of the Aldera schools were definitely MLA fronts from what he had been able to discover. A conundrum, since the Meta Liberation Army was a thing of the past now. Yet to have an entire school district in Mustafu already under MLA doctrine implied an organized attempt at a takeover. MLA ideals didn't just spring up overnight, this was something that had been going on for years. Not possible for this to be a mere splinter cell, how curious. Hacking into the superintendent's email address was easy for a super genius like himself, but all the emails there were tame and insignificant at first glance. Emails from parents concerned about their children, shipping manifest from Aichi Prefecture for school supplies, mayor asking superintendent for an update regarding field trips to City Hall, transfer of student transcripts to schools in Aichi Prefecture, billing information for more office supplies from a store here in Mustafu. Oh, how interesting, Nezu said, noticing the discrepancy right away now. They were getting their office supplies here in Mustafu. Wouldn't it make sense to get supplies for their schools here in Mustafu as well? Something else he could investigate then. With a sip of tea and an evil grin, Nezu continued his investigation. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.